Hi everyone, welcome back to Pine Hat. I hope you're all doing well. Tonight we're going to do something a little different. We're going to revisit a show that, on the surface, looks like a fun summer adventure cartoon about two kids solving mysteries in a small town in Oregon. But underneath all those bright colors and silly jokes, there's something else going on entirely. Something that gets darker and more disturbing every single time you go back to it. We're talking about Gravity Falls. And more specifically, we're going to spend the next few hours pulling apart the layers of this show, piece by piece, until we reach the parts that most people never even noticed were there. If you're here to fall asleep, settle in. This one's going to take a while, and honestly, it might give you some interesting dreams. If you're here to actually think about all of this, even better. Because the deeper you go into Gravity Falls, the more you realize that Alex Hirsch wasn't just making a children's show. He was hiding an entire world of secrets, tragedies, and genuinely unsettling ideas behind a veneer of comedy and cartoon logic. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve these videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. We've been growing so much lately, and that's entirely because of you. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. So here's the thing about Gravity Falls. When it first aired back on June 15th, 2012, on the Disney Channel, most people thought they knew what they were getting. A 12-year-old boy named Dipper and his twin sister Mabel get sent to spend the summer with their great uncle Stan in a tourist trap called the Mystery Shack, somewhere deep in the forests of Oregon. There are monsters. There are mysteries. There's a journal with a six-fingered hand on the cover. It's funny, it's charming, and it seems perfectly suited for its target audience. But from the very first frame of the very first episode, Alex Hirsch was planting seeds. Seeds that most viewers wouldn't understand for months, or even years. And the first place he hid them was in the opening credits themselves. Now, if you've watched Gravity Falls even once, you've probably noticed the cryptogram that flashes at the end of the opening theme. It's a series of letters that appear for just a fraction of a second before the screen cuts to the episode. Most people, on their first watch, assume it's just a visual flourish, a bit of atmosphere. But if you pause on those letters and apply a Caesar cipher, shifting each letter back by 3, you get a message. And that message reads, "Stan is not what he seems." Think about that for a moment. From the very first episode, before you know anything about the portal in the basement, before you know anything about Stanford, before you know that Grunkle Stan has been living under a stolen identity for 30 years, the show is already telling you. It's right there in the opening credits. And the vast majority of viewers had absolutely no idea. But Hirsch didn't stop there. See, the opening theme also contains a whispered audio message that plays backwards. If you reverse the audio from season 1, you hear the words 3 letters back. That's the key. That's Hirsch literally telling you how to decode the cryptogram. 3 letters back. A Caesar cipher with a shift of 3. He hid the answer inside the question. And as the show progresses, the ciphers get more complex. Around episode 7, the cryptograms switch from a Caesar cipher to an @bash cipher, where you mirror the alphabet so A becomes Z, B becomes Y, and so on. And the reversed whisper in the theme changes too. Now it says, switch A with Z. Then, around episode 14, it shifts again to an A1Z26 cipher, converting letters to numbers. The whisper becomes 26 letters. And when season 2 begins, everything upgrades to a Visionaire cipher, a much more sophisticated system that requires a keyword to decode. The whisper changes one more time, to Key Visionaire. What's remarkable about all of this is the sheer intentionality of it. Hirsch designed the show so that every single episode contained a hidden message that could only be decoded if you knew which cipher system was currently in use. And the clues to figuring that out were embedded in the theme song itself. The show was literally teaching its audience cryptography in real time, rewarding the most obsessive viewers with secrets that nobody else would ever find. And those decoded messages weren't throwaway gags. Some of them were genuine foreshadowing. Some hinted at character betrayals. Some referenced events that wouldn't happen for another full season. The very first decoded message, "Stan is not what he seems," is a prophecy that doesn't fully pay off until season 2, episode 11, which is literally titled, "Not What He Seems." That's over a year of real-world time between the hint and the reveal. But the ciphers are just the beginning. Because Gravity Falls is a show that rewards obsessive attention in ways that most television simply doesn't attempt. Let me give you an example. In the background of various episodes, if you look carefully at walls, signs, and set dressing, you can find a symbol that appears again and again. It's a crossed-out eye. Most viewers don't even register it on their first watch. It's just part of the scenery. But that symbol belongs to the Society of the Blind Eye, a secret organization that doesn't get revealed until Season 2, Episode 7. Hirsch was placing that symbol in the background from almost the very beginning, trusting that eventually someone would notice. And someone always did. Then there's the Bill Cipher wheel. In the opening credits, there's a brief flash of a circular diagram covered in symbols. A pine tree, a shooting star, a six-fingered hand, a question mark, a llama, an ice bag, a pair of glasses, a pentagram, a crescent, a heart. These symbols surround a triangle with a single eye, which is Bill Cipher himself, and each of those symbols represents a specific character in the show. The pine tree is Dipper. The shooting star is Mabel. The six-fingered hand is Ford. The question mark represents Seuss, and so on around the wheel. Now, this wheel doesn't become narratively important until the series finale, when it's revealed to be part of a prophecy about how to defeat Bill. But it's been sitting there in the opening credits from the very first episode, surrounded by characters who hadn't even been introduced yet. Hirsch planned the entire show from the beginning. The ending was baked into the opening, and that level of forethought is part of what makes rewatching Gravity Falls such an unsettling experience, because you start to realize just how much was hidden in plain sight. Here's another detail that most people miss entirely. In the very first episode, Tourist Trapped, there's a scene where Dipper finds Journal 3 in the forest. He opens it up and starts reading about the strange creatures and phenomena of Gravity Falls. And in the background of that scene, if you look very carefully at the trees, you can spot tiny eyes watching him. They're almost invisible, just little glowing dots among the foliage. But they're there. Something was watching Dipper from the moment he found that journal. And if you know the show's mythology, you know exactly who those eyes belong to. Bill Cipher was there from the start. Not just thematically, not just in the ciphers, but literally present in the world of the show, watching and waiting. He doesn't make his official appearance until Dreamscaperers, the 19th episode of Season 1. But those background details suggest he's been aware of Dipper and the journal for far longer than anyone realized. And that's really what we're going to be exploring tonight. Not just the surface-level Easter eggs, although those are fascinating in their own right. We're going to dig into the implications. The things that the show is really saying underneath its bright, colorful surface. Because the further you dig into Gravity Falls, the more you find stories about abuse, trauma, identity theft, psychological manipulation, addiction, and sacrifice. Stories that would be devastating in any context, but become genuinely disturbing when you remember that they were aired on the Disney Channel for an audience of children. Now, before we go deeper, I want to talk about something that a lot of people overlook when they discuss the hidden details in Gravity Falls, and that's the sheer density of the background art. This show's animation team packed every single frame with details that were designed to be caught on a second, third, or even 10th viewing. And some of those details are genuinely creepy when you notice them for the first time. Take the Mystery Shack itself. On your first watch, it just looks like a quirky tourist attraction. There are fake exhibits, overpriced souvenirs, and Stan running his usual cons on unsuspecting visitors. But look more carefully at the building. Look at the architecture. The angles are slightly wrong. The proportions are just a little bit off. And there are symbols carved into surfaces that you'd never notice unless you were looking for them. The building was designed by Ford before his disappearance, and it was designed with supernatural defense in mind. Some of those strange architectural choices aren't aesthetic quirks. They're protection sigils. And then there's the vending machine. In the gift shop of the Mystery Shack, there's a vending machine that appears in the background of dozens of episodes. It's just there. part of the furniture. But in Not What He Seems, we discover that this vending machine is actually a secret door that leads to a hidden staircase, which leads to an underground laboratory, which contains an interdimensional portal. The vending machine was in frame for over 30 episodes before its true purpose was revealed. Every single time you saw it, you were looking at the entrance to one of the show's biggest secrets, and you had no idea. This is what I mean about Gravity Falls getting darker on every rewatch. It's not just that the plot has dark elements. It's that the show was constructed so that darkness is literally built into the scenery. You can't unsee it once you know it's there. Every background becomes a potential hiding place for another secret. Every throwaway gag might contain a coded message. Every smiling face might be concealing something terrible. And if you're enjoying this kind of deep dive, a quick subscribe really does help. It's free, and it means we can keep making these long, detailed videos for you. We've got so much more to cover tonight, and this is exactly the kind of content that your support makes possible. Now, let's talk about something that perfectly illustrates how Gravity Falls plants its darkest seeds early. In The Inconveniencing, which is Season 1, Episode 5, Dipper and Mabel sneak into an abandoned convenience store called Dusk to Dawn with a group of teenagers. On the surface, it's a fun, spooky adventure. The store is haunted by the ghosts of an elderly couple, Ma and Pa Duskerton, and the episode plays out like a classic haunted house story with plenty of laughs. But here's what most people miss. If you look at the products on the shelves of Dusk to Dawn, many of them have names that are puns or references. That's normal for a cartoon. But some of the products have labels that, when decoded, contain disturbing messages. And the backstory of Ma and Pa Duskerton, the couple who died in the store, is actually much darker than the episode lets on. They didn't just die there. They were driven to their deaths by the teenagers of Gravity Falls who tormented them. The ghosts aren't random. They're vengeful spirits who target teenagers specifically because of what teenagers did to them. The episode frames this as comedy, but the underlying story is about elderly people being harassed to death and then spending eternity reliving their trauma. That's a pattern you'll see throughout Gravity Falls. The show gives you the comedy version first, the version that's safe for kids. But embedded within that version is a much darker story that only becomes visible when you start paying attention to the details. And the deeper you look, the worse it gets. Let me give you another example. The Hand That Rocks the Mabel, Season 1, Episode 4. This episode introduces Gideon Gleeful, a child psychic who becomes obsessed with Mabel. On the surface, Gideon is a comedic villain. He's a 10-year-old boy with a southern accent and an inflated sense of self-importance. He's funny. He's over the top. But watch the episode again with adult eyes, and what you see is a story about a child who uses manipulation, emotional blackmail, and eventually physical violence to try to force a girl into a relationship she doesn't want. Gideon literally refuses to accept that Mabel doesn't want to be his girlfriend. He escalates from charm to coercion to outright aggression, and the adults around him either enable or ignore his behavior. That's not just a cartoon villain. That's a genuinely disturbing portrait of possessive behavior and the failure of adults to protect children from it. And Hirsch plays it for laughs in a way that makes it accessible for kids. But the underlying dynamic is deeply uncomfortable when you recognize it for what it is. And Gideon's story only gets darker from there. He makes a deal with Bill Cipher. He goes to prison. He builds a giant robot to try to destroy the Mystery Shack. And in the Book of Bill, the companion book that Alex Hirsch published in 2024, we learn that Bill's treatment of Gideon during Weirdmageddon was far more cruel than the show depicted. Bill forced Gideon to perform an endless dance in a cage, wearing a humiliating sailor costume, for what felt like an eternity. And when Gideon tried to talk about the trauma afterward, Bill gaslit him, insisting that Gideon had enjoyed it. That's not cartoon villainy. That's a textbook description of how abusers rewrite their victims' experiences. But we're still in the shallow end. These are the details that attentive viewers might catch on a second or third watch. The background clues, the coded messages, the darker implications of seemingly innocent plot lines. What I want to do now is start going deeper, because the real darkness of Gravity Falls isn't in the Easter eggs. It's in the characters themselves, in the stories of the people who built this town and the secrets they've been carrying. And to understand the darkest layers of Gravity Falls, we need to start with Stanley Pines, because his story is, in many ways, the most devastating thing in the entire show. And most of it is hidden beneath a character who seems, on the surface, like nothing more than a lovable con man. Now, here's something that's easy to forget about Gravity Falls. For the entire first season, and much of the second, the audience doesn't even know Stanley's real name. We know him as Grunkle Stan, Stanford Pines, the guy who runs the Mystery Shack. He's funny. He's grumpy. He clearly loves Dipper and Mabel, even though he'd never admit it. He's the kind of character who makes you laugh every time he's on screen. But in Not What He Seems, the 11th episode of Season 2, everything changes. We learn that the man we've been calling Stanford Pines for the entire show is actually Stanley Pines. And the real Stanford Pines, his twin brother, has been trapped in another dimension for 30 years. Let that sink in. For over 30 episodes, the main adult character of the show has been lying about his identity. Not in a small way, in the most fundamental way possible. He stole his brother's name. He faked his own death. He assumed a completely different identity and maintained that lie for 3 decades. And the audience, just like the characters in the show, had no idea. But the really dark part isn't the identity theft itself. It's why it happened. And to understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey, where Stanley and Stanford Pines grew up. Stan and Ford were twins, but they couldn't have been more different in the ways that mattered to their father, Philbrick Pines. Ford was the smart one, the genius. He had a rare genetic anomaly that gave him 6 fingers on each hand, which made him unusual, but his intellect more than compensated. He was destined for greatness. Their father saw Ford as the family's ticket out of poverty. Ford was going to go to West Coast Tech, one of the most prestigious universities in the country, and he was going to make something of himself. Stan, on the other hand, was the screw-up, the troublemaker, the one who didn't have a plan. He wasn't stupid, not by any means, but he wasn't Ford. And in Philbrick Pines' eyes, that was the only thing that mattered. The brothers were incredibly close as kids. They had a shared dream of sailing the world together, exploring the unknown, having adventures. They even had a boat they were fixing up, the Stan-O-War. It was their symbol of everything they were going to do together. Their promise to each other that no matter what happened, they'd always be a team. But then something happened that tore everything apart. Ford's science fair project, a perpetual motion machine that could have won him a full scholarship to West Coast Tech, was damaged, and Stan was involved. The exact circumstances are somewhat ambiguous, and the show presents it in a way that suggests Stan may have accidentally sabotaged the project, though whether it was truly accidental or driven by subconscious jealousy is left for the viewer to decide. What happened next is not ambiguous at all. Philbrick Pines kicked Stan out of the house. Not when Stan was 18. Not when Stan was ready. He kicked out his teenage son because Stan had cost the family their shot at Ford's success. He literally threw Stan out the door with nothing but the clothes on his back and told him not to come home until he'd made something of himself. Stan's mother watched it happen. She didn't stop it. And just like that, Stanley Pines was alone. What follows is one of the most quietly devastating backstories in animation history. Stan becomes homeless. He lives in his car. He drifts from state to state, running cons and scams just to survive. He gets banned from multiple states. He ends up in prison. Not just once, multiple times. At one point, he ends up in a Colombian prison, which the show mentions almost as a throwaway joke, but which, when you think about it, implies a level of desperation and danger that is profoundly disturbing for a character in a children's cartoon. Stan spends years like this. Alone, broke, constantly running. He has no home, no family, no identity of his own that's worth anything. His father's rejection didn't just damage him emotionally, it destroyed his entire life trajectory. Everything that happens to Stan after that moment, every crime he commits, every lie he tells, every con he runs, can be traced back to a father who looked at his son and decided he wasn't worth keeping. And here's where it gets really painful, because eventually, Ford calls. After years of no contact, Stanford reaches out to his brother, but it's not a reconciliation. Ford doesn't call because he misses Stan. He calls because he needs help. He's in Gravity Falls, Oregon, working on a mysterious research project, and something has gone terribly wrong. He needs someone he can trust. And despite everything, despite the years of silence, despite the rejection, Stan comes. This is one of those moments that changes completely on a rewatch. The first time you see Stan arrive in Gravity Falls, it seems like the beginning of their reconciliation. Two brothers, reunited after years apart. But knowing what we know about Stan's life in the interim, knowing that he was homeless and desperate and broken, the scene takes on an entirely different quality. Stan isn't coming to Gravity Falls as an equal. He's coming as a man who has nothing left to lose, reaching for the only connection he has left in the world. And what he finds when he gets there is somehow worse than what he left behind. Ford is paranoid, unstable. He's been working alone in the woods for years, studying supernatural phenomena and building a machine that he now believes is too dangerous to exist. Ford shows Stan the portal, a device capable of creating doorways between dimensions, and tells him it must be destroyed. He gives Stan a journal, one of 3 he's written documenting his research, and tells him to take it as far away as possible. But they fight. Of course they fight. Years of resentment and hurt come pouring out. Stan is furious that Ford only reached out because he needed something. Ford is furious that Stan still won't take anything seriously. And in the middle of that fight, near the portal, something goes wrong. Stan accidentally pushes Ford toward the machine. The portal activates, and Ford falls through. In an instant, Ford is gone. Not dead, not missing, gone. Sucked into another dimension, with no way back. And Stan is left standing alone in the basement of a house in the middle of nowhere, staring at a broken machine, holding a journal he doesn't understand, knowing that he just lost his brother to something that shouldn't exist. This is where the 30-year lie begins. And this is where Stan's story shifts from tragic to almost unbearable. Because Stan doesn't leave. He doesn't call for help. He doesn't tell anyone what happened. Instead, he does the only thing he knows how to do. He cons. He takes Ford's identity. He takes Ford's house. He fakes his own death so that nobody comes looking for Stanley Pines. And then he spends the next 30 years of his life trying to figure out how to bring his brother back. 30 years. Think about that. 30 years of living under a stolen name, running a tourist trap to fund his research, teaching himself physics and engineering and interdimensional mechanics. All alone, all in secret, all driven by a guilt so deep that he couldn't stop, even when every rational part of him must have been screaming that it was hopeless. Stan gave up his entire life for a brother who, in many ways, had already given up on him. And here's the detail that makes it even worse. Stan wasn't good at the science. He wasn't Ford. He didn't have the genius-level intellect that built the portal in the first place. Every breakthrough he made, he had to fight for. Every equation he solved took him 10 times longer than it would have taken Ford. He burnt himself. He electrocuted himself. He failed over and over and over again. But he kept going. For 30 years. Because the alternative was accepting that his brother was gone forever. And that it was his fault. If you're enjoying this and you haven't subscribed yet, it really does make a difference. It's free, and it helps us keep making these long-form deep dives that I know a lot of you look forward to. We're not even close to done tonight, and it's only going to get more interesting from here. Now, I want to stay with Stan for a moment longer, because there's an aspect of his story that I think gets overlooked. We talk about the 30-year portal project, and we talk about the identity theft, and both of those things are staggering. But what we don't talk about enough is what it must have been like to live as someone else for that long. Stan didn't just borrow Ford's name. He became Ford. He answered to Ford's name. He lived in Ford's house. He wore Ford's clothes. When people in Gravity Falls talked to him, they were talking to a man they thought was Stanford Pines. And Stan had to perform that role every single day for 3 decades. What does that do to a person? What does it mean to live your entire adult life pretending to be someone else? At what point does the mask become the face? Stan's own identity, the person he actually was, became something he had to hide. Stanley Pines was officially dead. He couldn't be Stanley even if he wanted to. He had erased himself. And this connects to one of the deepest themes of the entire show: identity. Who are you when you take away the name, the role, the expectations? Stan spent his whole life being told he wasn't good enough as himself. His father rejected him. His brother outshone him. And his solution, the only one he could find, was to stop being Stanley entirely. He became someone else, someone more respectable, someone with credentials, and a house and a name that meant something. But it was all a lie. And the show asks, quietly, painfully, whether a life built on a lie can still contain genuine love. Because Stan does love Dipper and Mabel. That's not part of the con. When they arrive for the summer, he finds something real in his relationship with them. But they don't even know his real name. They think they're staying with their great Uncle Stanford. The love is real, but it exists inside a framework of deception. And that tension between authentic emotion and fundamental dishonesty runs through every single scene Stan has with the kids once you know the truth. This is what I mean about the show getting darker on every rewatch. The first time through, Stan's scenes with Dipper and Mabel are heartwarming. The grumpy old man who secretly adores his great-niece and great-nephew. It's a classic dynamic. It works beautifully. But the second time through, once you know who Stan really is, those same scenes become exercises in dramatic irony. Every time Mabel calls him Grunkle Stan, you know she's using the wrong name. Every time Dipper looks to him for guidance, you know he's looking at a man who has been lying to him about the most basic facts of his existence. And the scene in Not What He Seems, where the truth finally comes out? On a first viewing, it's a shocking twist. On a second viewing, it's devastating. Because you've been watching a man slowly destroy himself with guilt and secrecy for the entire show, and the moment when it all unravels isn't triumphant. It's terrifying. Stan is exposed. The lie is over. And he doesn't know if the people he loves will ever forgive him. But that's not even the darkest part of Stan's story. The darkest part comes at the very end. In the series finale, Weirdmageddon Part 3, Take Back the Falls, Stan makes the ultimate sacrifice. To defeat Bill Cipher, someone has to allow Bill into their mind and then have that mind erased. And Stan volunteers. He lets Ford erase his memory, his personality, everything that makes him who he is, to save the world. Stan Pines, a man who already gave up his identity once, gives it up again. This time, voluntarily. This time, knowing that he'll lose not just his name, but his memories of Dipper, Mabel, and the summer that finally gave his life meaning. The show gives us a happy ending. Stan's memories come back, gradually, through the love of his family. But even that resolution can't undo the weight of what happened. A man who spent 30 years erasing himself to save his brother ends up having himself literally erased to save the world. The show treats this as heroic, and it is. But it's also a story about a person who never got to simply exist as himself. Every stage of Stan's life required him to sacrifice who he was for someone else. And that's not just sad. On reflection, it's genuinely harrowing. But now, let's shift our focus. Because as dark as Stan's story is, it's arguably not the most disturbing relationship in the show. That distinction belongs to Stanford Pines and Bill Cipher. And to understand why this relationship is so unsettling, we need to understand how Bill operates. Bill Cipher makes his first appearance in Dreamscapers, the 19th episode of Season 1. He's summoned by Gideon Gleeful, who needs Bill's help to steal the combination to Stan's safe. And right from the start, Bill is unlike any other character in the show. He's a triangle. He's got a top hat and a bow tie and a single enormous eye. He speaks in a voice that's simultaneously friendly and threatening. He's funny. He's quotable. He floats around making deals and cracking jokes and calling everyone by patronizing nicknames. Pine Tree for Dipper, Shooting Star for Mabel, Sixer for Ford. On the surface, Bill seems like a classic cartoon villain. Entertaining, charismatic, and ultimately defeatable. But that's the surface. And Gravity Falls is never really about the surface. The thing about Bill is that he's not just powerful. He's smart. Not smart in the way that cartoon villains are usually smart, where they come up with elaborate plans that have obvious flaws. Bill is psychologically intelligent. He understands people. He knows what they want, what they fear, what makes them vulnerable, and he uses that understanding with surgical precision to get exactly what he needs from them. And nowhere is this more evident than in his relationship with Ford. Now, this is where things start to get really interesting. Ford came to Gravity Falls as a young researcher, drawn by the town's unusually high concentration of supernatural phenomena. He was brilliant. He was driven. He was also deeply isolated. Ford had spent his entire life feeling like an outsider because of his 6 fingers, and his academic career, while successful, hadn't brought him the human connection he craved. He was alone in the woods, studying things that most people would think were insane, and he was desperate for someone who understood him. Enter Bill Cipher. Bill approached Ford not as an enemy, not as a tempter, not as a deal-making demon. He approached Ford as a muse. He told Ford that every century he chose one brilliant mind to inspire, one special person who was capable of understanding the deeper truths of the universe. And he chose Ford. Think about how that must have felt. Here's a man who has spent his entire life feeling different, feeling alone, feeling like nobody truly sees him. And suddenly, an immensely powerful being from another dimension appears and tells him that he's special, that he was chosen, that his differences, the very things that set him apart from everyone else, are exactly what make him worthy of attention. It's flattering. It's intoxicating. And it's a lie. Because Bill didn't choose Ford for his brilliance. He chose Ford for his vulnerability. Bill needed someone to build a portal between dimensions, a doorway that would allow Bill to enter the physical world and reshape it according to his will. And he needed that person to be smart enough to do the work, but isolated enough that no one would stop them. Ford was perfect, not because he was special, but because he was alone. And this is where the relationship between Ford and Bill starts to mirror something much more real and much more disturbing than a typical cartoon villain dynamic. Because what Bill does to Ford is, quite frankly, textbook emotional abuse. First, Bill isolates Ford further. Ford's research partner, Fiddleford McGucket, begins to express concerns about the portal project. He sees something through the portal that terrifies him so badly that he begs Ford to shut the whole thing down. And Bill, working through Ford's mind, encourages Ford to dismiss Fiddleford's fears, to see him as weak, as not understanding. Bill positions himself as the only one who truly gets Ford, the only one whose opinion matters, and gradually cuts Ford off from the few human connections he has left. Then Bill starts gaslighting. When Ford begins to have doubts about the portal, Bill reassures him, flatters him, tells him that the work is too important to stop, that the doubts are just fear, and that fear is beneath someone of Ford's intellect. Bill makes Ford feel stupid for questioning him and brilliant for obeying him. It's a push and pull dynamic that's designed to keep Ford off balance, never quite sure whether to trust his own instincts or defer to Bill's seemingly superior knowledge. And then there's the possession. Bill doesn't just talk to Ford. He enters Ford's mind. He takes over Ford's body while Ford sleeps. Ford starts to lose time. He wakes up in places he doesn't remember going, with injuries he doesn't remember getting. His journal entries, which were once neat and methodical, become erratic. His handwriting changes. There are pages stained with what appears to be blood. Ford is losing control of his own body, and Bill is using it for purposes that Ford doesn't fully understand. This is what makes the Ford and Bill relationship so much darker than it initially appears. On the surface, it's a story about a scientist who made a deal with a demon. That's a classic trope. Faust. It's as old as literature itself, but Hirsch takes it somewhere much more specific and much more painful. The dynamic between Ford and Bill isn't just Faustian. It's abusive. Bill behaves like a controlling partner who systematically breaks down his victim's sense of self, isolates them from support systems, and makes them believe that the abuse is actually love. And the show acknowledges this. In The Last Mabelcorn, the 15th episode of Season 2, Ford reveals that he eventually realized Bill's true nature and had a metal plate surgically embedded in his skull to prevent Bill from entering his mind. Think about that. Ford was so traumatized by what Bill did to him that he had metal put inside his head as a form of protection. That's not a cartoon plot point. That's a survival mechanism. Now here's something most people miss about this part of the story. We tend to focus on the portal and the cosmic implications of Bill's plan. The end of the world. Weirdmageddon. The big, dramatic stuff. But the real horror of the Ford and Bill relationship is personal. It's intimate. It's about a lonely man who thought he'd finally found someone who understood him, only to discover that the connection was manufactured, the affection was tactical, and the person he trusted most was using him as a tool. And if you're someone who's ever been in a relationship like that, where someone made you feel special as a way to control you, Ford's story isn't just dark. It's painfully recognizable. The Book of Bill, which Hirsch published in 2024, makes this even more explicit. The book is written from Bill's perspective, and in it, Bill describes his relationship with Ford in terms that read like a toxic ex reminiscing about a past partner. He talks about how Ford was his favorite, how no one understood Ford the way Bill did, how Ford threw away something beautiful when he rejected Bill's influence. The language Bill uses is possessive, manipulative, and disturbingly intimate. It sits, as one critic noted, somewhere between "I love you" and "I want to see you dead." And the book reveals something even worse. There's a scene where Bill, while possessing Ford's body, goes to a payphone and attempts to make a call. The call is to Stan. And the message Bill intended to leave, posing as Ford, was designed to be a psychological weapon. He wanted Stan to believe that Ford was in crisis, that Ford blamed Stan for everything, and that Ford was never coming back. The call didn't go through because the payphone was broken, but the intent was there. Bill was trying to use Ford's body to inflict maximum emotional damage on the one person who might eventually come to Ford's rescue. That's not cartoon villainy. That's something far more insidious. And the fact that it almost worked, that it failed only because of a broken machine, makes it even more chilling. Bill was willing to destroy Ford's family relationships while wearing Ford's face. The violation is almost too complete to process. And if you're still with me, if you haven't subscribed yet, now might be a good time. Because we're about to go even deeper, and I want to make sure we can keep bringing you this kind of content. Every subscription, every like, it all helps more than you know. And we're just getting started. Now I want to talk about a character who I think might have the most tragic story in all of Gravity Falls, and that's Fiddleford McGucket. When we first meet McGucket, he seems like a joke. He's the local kook, the town weirdo. He lives in the junkyard, he talks to himself, he builds bizarre machines out of scrap metal, and everyone in Gravity Falls treats him like he's harmless but crazy. He's comic relief, pure and simple. Old Man McGucket, the crazy guy who eats things off the ground. But Society of the Blind Eye, the 7th episode of Season 2, reveals that McGucket isn't what he appears to be. Just like Stan isn't what he seems, McGucket isn't what he looks like. Because Fiddleford McGucket used to be a genius. Before Gravity Falls, McGucket was a brilliant engineer. He had a family, a wife named Emma May, a son named Tate. He was one of the smartest people in the country. And when Ford invited him to Gravity Falls to help with the portal project, McGucket came willingly. He left his family behind and threw himself into the work because he believed in what Ford was doing. But then McGucket saw something through the portal. The show never fully reveals what he saw, but whatever it was, it broke him. It terrified him so completely that he begged Ford to shut down the project immediately. Ford, already under Bill's influence, refused, and McGucket, unable to cope with what he'd witnessed, made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He built a gun that could erase memories. Now, on the surface, this seems like a reasonable response. You saw something terrible. You want to forget it. You have the engineering skill to build a device that can make that happen. So you use it. You erase the memory of what you saw through the portal, and you move on. But McGucket didn't stop there. And this is where his story goes from tragic to genuinely horrifying. Because the memory gun worked, it erased the traumatic memory, but it also left a gap, a hole where the memory used to be. And that hole felt wrong. It felt like something was missing, even if McGucket couldn't remember what. So he used the gun again, and again, and again. Over the following months and years, McGucket used the memory gun compulsively. Every time he encountered something strange or frightening in Gravity Falls, and in Gravity Falls that happened a lot, he'd erase the memory. Every time he felt anxious or afraid, or reminded of whatever he'd seen through the portal, he'd erase the memory. It became an addiction, a coping mechanism that was slowly destroying his mind. And here's the devastating part. The memory gun didn't just erase specific memories. With repeated use, it caused cumulative brain damage. McGucket's intellect began to deteriorate. His personality changed. He became erratic, confused, and eventually incapable of functioning normally. The brilliant engineer, who could have been one of the great minds of his generation, reduced himself to the town crazy person, one memory at a time. But it gets worse. Because McGucket didn't just forget the bad things. He forgot everything. He forgot his wife. He forgot his son. He forgot his own research. He forgot who he was. The person we meet at the beginning of Gravity Falls, the gibbering, incoherent old man in the junkyard, isn't a character. He's a casualty. He's what's left of a person who was so afraid of his own memories that he lobotomized himself with a machine he built. And the show reveals, through recovered security camera footage, the progression of McGucket's decline. We see him using the memory gun for the first time, carefully and deliberately, erasing one specific memory. Then we see him using it again, weeks later, for a different memory. Then again, and again. And the footage shows him changing, becoming less coherent, more confused. His handwriting deteriorating, his speech patterns shifting. By the end, we see a man who can barely remember his own name, sitting alone in a room, surrounded by notes he can no longer read, holding a device he can no longer understand, asking himself who he is. That's one of the most harrowing sequences in the entire show. And it's presented to us as a revelation, a mystery solved, which means the emotional weight doesn't fully land on a first viewing. You're too busy processing the plot twist to feel the full impact of what you're seeing. But on a rewatch, when you know what's coming, those early scenes of McGucket being played for laughs become almost unwatchable. Every joke about the crazy old man in the junkyard is a joke about a person who destroyed his own mind because he couldn't bear what he'd seen. And there's another layer to this that I think is really important. McGucket didn't just use the memory gun on himself. He founded the Society of the Blind Eye, an organization dedicated to erasing the supernatural memories of the citizens of Gravity Falls. When anyone in town witnessed something they couldn't explain, the Society would find them and erase the memory. They did this for decades. An entire town's worth of traumatic memories, systematically removed and replaced with gaps. The implications of this are staggering. It means that the citizens of Gravity Falls have been walking around for years with holes in their memory, experiences they can't account for, time they can't remember. The town's collective memory has been edited, censored, and rewritten by an organization that most of its members can't even remember belonging to. Gravity Falls isn't just a town with supernatural secrets. It's a town with enforced amnesia. And the man responsible for all of it is the same man who sits in the junkyard eating mud. Think about what that means for the show's seemingly normal background characters. Lazy Susan, Manly Dan, Tyler the biker, Toby determined. All of these people have had memories erased. All of them have gaps in their personal histories that they can't explain, and none of them know it. They go about their daily lives, completely unaware that their perception of reality has been deliberately manipulated. This is Gravity Falls at its darkest. Not monsters and demons, but the systematic alteration of human consciousness. The idea that your own memories might not be trustworthy. That the life you remember living might not be the life you actually lived. That someone could reach into your mind and cut pieces out, and you'd never know it happened. And here's the thing that really gets me. McGucket started the Society of the Blind Eye with good intentions. He genuinely believed he was helping people. He saw the pain that supernatural encounters caused, and he thought the most compassionate thing to do was to take that pain away. But what started as compassion became something much darker. An institutionalized system of memory suppression that robbed an entire town of their ability to understand their own reality. The road to hell, as they say, is paved with good intentions. And McGucket's road led to a town full of people with edited minds, and a man who can no longer remember why he's crying. Now, while we're on the subject of families and the damage they inflict, I want to turn our attention to the Northwests, because the Northwest family represents something different from the personal tragedies of Stan and McGucket. They represent institutional darkness, generational corruption, the kind of evil that doesn't need a single villain because it's built into the family itself. The Northwests are the wealthiest and most prestigious family in Gravity Falls. They live in a mansion on a hill, they throw elaborate parties, and they look down on everyone in town with undisguised contempt. The patriarch, Preston Northwest, is a man who values status above everything, including the well-being of his own daughter. And the family's history, as we learn in Northwest Mansion Mystery, is built on a lie. The Northwests are credited as the founders of Gravity Falls. There's a statue of Nathaniel Northwest in the town square. They're celebrated as pioneers who built the town from nothing. But it's not true. The town was actually built by lumberjacks, working-class men who cleared the forests, built the roads, laid the foundations of everything Gravity Falls would become. And the Northwest's contribution was to swindle those lumberjacks out of their earnings and take credit for their work. In Northwest Mansion Mystery, the 10th episode of Season 2, we learn the specifics. Nathaniel Northwest made a promise to the lumberjacks who built his mansion. He told them that once the mansion was complete, he would open its doors and throw a party for the entire town. The lumberjacks built the mansion, and when it was done, Nathaniel shut the gates and refused to let any of them in. He broke his promise, took what they'd built, and left them with nothing. And one of those lumberjacks died. Caught in a mudslide, caused by the Northwest's deforestation, he perished. But before he died, he cursed the family. He swore that if the Northwests didn't honor their promise within 150 years, his vengeance would come. And that's exactly what happens in the episode. The lumberjack's ghost returns, and the Northwest mansion becomes a literal haunted house. But the ghost isn't the darkest part of this story. The darkest part is what happens between Pacifica and her parents. Pacifica Northwest, on first impression, seems like a standard mean girl character. She's rich, she's snobbish, she looks down on Mabel, and she embodies everything that's wrong with inherited privilege. But Northwest Mansion Mystery reveals that Pacifica isn't just spoiled. She's controlled. There's a scene in the episode where Preston Northwest rings a small bell, and Pacifica immediately stops talking. She stops mid-sentence, her posture changes, and she becomes silent and compliant. It's played subtly enough that you might miss it on a first viewing, but it's not subtle at all. Pacifica's parents have conditioned her to respond to a bell like a trained animal. When the bell rings, Pacifica obeys. No questions. No resistance. This is behavioral conditioning. It's a real psychological technique, and it's a form of emotional abuse. The Northwests haven't just raised their daughter with strict expectations. They've programmed her. They've trained her to suppress her own thoughts and desires at the sound of a chime. And Pacifica has been living with this her entire life, which means she's internalized it so deeply that she may not even recognize it as abnormal. And the Book of Bill takes this even further. It reveals that Pacifica suffers from nightmares connected to her family's legacy. In one sequence, she's washing her hands at a party, and they become covered in blood that she can't wash off. An invisible hand writes, "Blood on your hands," on the mirror. She runs to find her family and friends, but they've been replaced by cardboard cutouts. Blood fills the mansion. And when she tries to escape, she finds herself grown to enormous size, destroying Gravity Falls with every step, surrounded by the graves of her ancestors. This is PTSD rendered as nightmare. The blood on her hands represents the guilt of her family's crimes. The cardboard cutouts represent the emptiness of the relationships she's been raised to maintain. And the destructive giant represents her fear that she is, inescapably, a Northwest. That the corruption in her blood will manifest no matter what she does. It's a remarkably sophisticated portrayal of inherited trauma for any medium, let alone one associated with children's entertainment. What makes Pacifica's story especially poignant is that she's the one Northwest who tries to break the cycle. In Northwest Mansion Mystery, she opens the mansion gates against her father's wishes, fulfilling the promise that was broken 150 years ago. She chooses to do the right thing, even though it means defying everything she's been taught. And the show treats this as a genuine act of courage, because for Pacifica, disobedience isn't just rebellious. It's terrifying. She's been conditioned to believe that defiance will bring consequences, and she does it anyway. But we need to keep going, because we haven't even gotten to the darkest material yet. Everything we've discussed so far, Stan's stolen identity, Ford's manipulation, McGucket's memory addiction, Pacifica's conditioning, all of it exists within the show itself. What I want to talk about now is what lies beneath even those layers. The origin story that makes everything else possible. The story of Bill Cipher himself. And if this is the kind of content you enjoy, subscribing really is the best way to make sure we keep going. It's completely free, and it tells the algorithm that this community matters. We're about to enter some really fascinating territory, and I'm glad you're here for it. Now, Bill Cipher's origin is something that the show itself only hints at. We get pieces, fragments, enough to know that Bill comes from somewhere else and that he did something terrible there. But the full picture doesn't come together until you combine the show's clues with the information in the Book of Bill and various statements Alex Hirsch has made over the years. Here's what we know. Over 1 trillion years ago, long before the events of the show, Bill existed in a two-dimensional realm called Euclidia. Think of it like the world described in Edwin Abbott's novel, Flatland, a universe where everything exists on a flat plane, length and width, but no height. The inhabitants of Euclidia lived their entire lives in two dimensions. They couldn't look up. They couldn't look down. Their entire reality was flat. And Bill was born different. He had a mutation, a rare condition that allowed him to perceive the existence of a third dimension. He could sense, even if he couldn't quite see, that there was more to reality than the flat plane he lived on. And this perception consumed him. He became obsessed with the idea that there was a whole dimension that his people couldn't see. A dimension with depth and height and stars. Now, in Euclidia, any talk of a third dimension was forbidden, not just discouraged, forbidden. The rulers of Euclidia had good reason for this, though the show and the book leave those reasons somewhat ambiguous. What's clear is that Bill's insistence on the existence of a third dimension was seen as dangerous, perhaps even insane. His parents, Scalene and Euclid, tried to help him. They tried to stop him from pursuing this obsession. And depending on which source you consult, Bill may have been subjected to some form of forced treatment or medication to suppress his perceptions. Think about that for a moment. A child who can see something that nobody else can see, being told that what he sees isn't real, being told he's crazy, being medicated or punished for describing a reality that actually exists. It doesn't excuse what Bill eventually does, but it does explain it. Bill's entire relationship with reality was shaped by being told that his perceptions were wrong. And then Bill did the thing that defines him. He tried to show his people the third dimension. He tried to free them from their flat existence, to open their eyes to the universe that lay beyond their plane. And the result was catastrophic. Bill didn't just fail, he destroyed Euclidia. The entire dimension burned. Every living being in it, including his parents, was killed. Bill's attempt to liberate his world annihilated it. And here's where Bill's story becomes genuinely complex, in a way that most cartoon villains never achieve. Because the destruction of Euclidia wasn't necessarily intentional. The evidence from the show, the book, and Hirsch's statements suggests that Bill was trying to do something he believed was good. He wanted to help his people see the truth. He wanted to share the beauty of the third dimension with everyone he loved. And instead, he killed them all. The axolotl, a mysterious cosmic entity that appears in the Gravity Falls expanded universe, has a poem about Bill that includes the lines, "Saw his own dimension burn, misses home and can't return. Says he's happy. He's a liar. Blame the arson for the fire. Says he's happy. He's a liar." That line alone recontextualizes everything Bill does in the show. Every joke he cracks, every deal he makes, every moment of chaotic glee, it's all performance. Underneath the top hat and the bow tie and the all-seeing eye, Bill is a being defined by a loss so total that he can't even acknowledge it. He destroyed everyone he ever loved, and he's been running from that truth for 1 trillion years. And here's what makes it even more devastating. The Book of Bill reveals that after the destruction of Euclidia, the souls of Bill's parents became trapped inside him. For nearly 1 trillion years, the people he killed have been carried within the being that killed them. Bill doesn't just remember what he did. He's literally carrying the evidence of it everywhere he goes. There are moments in the Book of Bill where Bill's writing becomes erratic. The text starts to glitch. Words are obscured. And in those moments, you can catch fragments of genuine emotion. Guilt, grief, horror at what he's done. But they're always quickly buried under another joke, another threat, another act of chaos. Because that's how Bill copes. He turns everything into performance. He makes the pain into comedy. And he's been doing it for so long that he may have convinced himself it's real. But as the axolotl says, he's a liar. This adds an entirely new dimension to every scene Bill appears in throughout the show. When Bill possesses Dipper's body in sock opera and gleefully throws himself downstairs, stabs himself with forks, and marvels at the sensation of pain, it's funny on the surface. But knowing Bill's backstory, it takes on a different quality. This is a being who existed for eons without a physical form, without the ability to touch or feel or experience the material world. His eagerness to feel pain isn't just alien curiosity. It's the desperate craving of something that has been numb for longer than human civilization has existed. And when Bill tries to merge the nightmare realm with the physical world during Weirdmageddon, his motivation isn't just conquest, it's homecoming. Bill can't go back to Euclidia because Euclidia doesn't exist anymore. So he's trying to build a new home in the only dimension that will have him. And if that means destroying everything that already exists there, well, he's done that before. He knows what it costs, and he's decided he can live with it. Because the alternative is remaining formless and alone in the void forever. None of this excuses Bill's actions. He's a monster by any reasonable definition. He tortures people. He manipulates them. He treats sentient beings as toys. But Gravity Falls doesn't present him as a simple monster. It presents him as a tragedy. A being who is broken by the collision between truth and a world that couldn't handle it. And that's so much more disturbing than a villain who's evil just because the plot needs one. But now, let's go to the material that really shocked people. Let's talk about what the Book of Bill revealed in 2024. Because when Alex Hirsch published that book, he finally showed us the content that Disney wouldn't let him put on television. And some of it is genuinely harrowing. The Book of Bill is presented as Bill Cipher's personal journal, written while he's imprisoned in a dimension called the Theraprism. After his defeat at the end of Gravity Falls, Bill made a deal with the axolotl to avoid complete annihilation. The price was that he had to undergo what's essentially forced rehabilitation. He was placed in a maximum security wellness center in a dimension outside of time and space, where he's subjected to mandatory therapy sessions and what the book describes as indefinite karmic rehabilitation. And right away, the framing of the book is darker than anything in the show. Bill is in prison, a cosmic prison designed to rehabilitate interdimensional tyrants. He's wearing an orange jumpsuit and an ankle monitor. He's surrounded by therapists who use methods that the book itself describes as controversial and cruel. And one of those methods is solitary confinement, which the book explicitly compares to psychological torture. So even the setup of the Book of Bill is disturbing. A being of immense power, stripped of that power, subjected to forced treatment in isolation. It's prison, but cosmic. And the fact that it's played as both darkly comic and genuinely upsetting is a testament to Hirsch's skill as a writer. But the real darkness is in the details. The book contains content that would never, ever have been allowed on Disney Channel. We're talking about graphic imagery of human body parts, realistic depictions of violence, pages stained with blood, and scenes of psychological manipulation that are far more explicit than anything the show attempted. One of the most discussed revelations in the Book of Bill is what happened while Bill was possessing Ford's body. The show gives us hints. We know Bill controlled Ford while he slept. We know Ford lost time. We know there were injuries. But the book fills in the gaps, and what it reveals is profoundly disturbing. While possessing Ford, Bill did things that Ford would never have done. He used Ford's hands to hurt people. He used Ford's voice to say things that Ford would never have said. And one of the most chilling specific examples is the payphone call I mentioned earlier. Bill, wearing Ford's body, attempted to call Stan and leave a message designed to psychologically devastate him. The message, posing as Ford, was crafted to make Stan believe that his brother was in despair, that the situation was hopeless, and that Ford blamed Stan for everything. The intent was to push Stan to a breaking point, to use a fake crisis call as a weapon. The call didn't go through. The payphone was broken. But the fact that Bill conceived of it, that he understood exactly how to weaponize the brothers' complicated relationship against them, reveals a level of cruelty that goes far beyond the cartoon villainy we see in the show. This isn't a demon trying to take over the world. This is a psychological predator who understands human pain intimately and uses it deliberately. And then there's the physical dimension of Bill's cruelty while possessing Ford. The book describes a scene where Bill drives a nail through Ford's hand. Not his own hand, Ford's hand. Bill is a passenger in someone else's body, and he's deliberately damaging it. He's hurting Ford in the most literal way possible, using Ford's own body as the instrument of that pain. And Ford is aware of it. He's trapped inside his own mind, watching someone else use his hands to hurt himself, and he can't stop it. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think it's one of the most genuinely disturbing concepts in the entire Gravity Falls mythology. The idea of being trapped inside your own body while someone else controls it. Watching your hands do things you'd never choose to do. Feeling pain that someone else is deliberately inflicting on you through your own flesh. It's body horror at its most intimate. And Gravity Falls, a show that aired on the Disney Channel, built one of its central relationships around this concept. The Book of Bill also expands on Bill's manipulation tactics in ways that are uncomfortably realistic. There are pages where Bill writes about Ford the way an abusive partner writes about an ex. He talks about how special Ford was, how no one else understood him the way Bill did, how Ford threw away something beautiful when he tried to break free. The language shifts between possessive affection and contemptuous dismissal, sometimes within the same paragraph. And it's clearly designed to make the reader understand that Bill's relationship with Ford wasn't just manipulative. It was, in its own twisted way, personal. Bill felt something for Ford. Not love, not anything that healthy people would recognize as love, but something. An obsessive, controlling, consuming fixation that Bill himself might call love if he had the emotional vocabulary for it. And this is what elevates Gravity Falls beyond most animated shows. The villain isn't just powerful. He's emotionally complex. His cruelty isn't random. It's specific, targeted, and rooted in a personal history that makes it comprehensible, even as it remains inexcusable. You understand why Bill does what he does, and that understanding makes it worse, not better. Now, if you're still with me and you're finding this as fascinating as I do, subscribing is genuinely the best way to support what we do here. Every new subscriber tells us that these deep dives matter, that this community wants thoughtful, long-form content that actually explores these stories in depth, and that's what keeps us going. Now, I want to talk about Weirdmageddon itself, because the apocalypse that Bill unleashes in the final episodes of Gravity Falls contains some of the most disturbing imagery in the entire show, and a lot of it goes by so quickly that viewers don't fully register what they're seeing. When Bill enters the physical world through the rift, he doesn't just conquer Gravity Falls. He reshapes it. Reality itself becomes malleable. The laws of physics stop working. Geometry becomes hostile. And the people of Gravity Falls are subjected to horrors that the show depicts with remarkable boldness for a Disney production. The most iconic image from Weirdmageddon is Bill's throne. When Bill establishes himself as the ruler of his new domain, he creates a throne to sit on, and that throne is made of people, not representations of people, not statues or mannequins. Actual citizens of Gravity Falls, frozen alive, their bodies contorted into the shape of furniture. Bill literally sits on a chair made of living, conscious human beings who have been turned to stone, but remain aware. Let me say that again, because I think it's easy to let that slide past you. The people in the throne are alive. They're aware. They're frozen in place, unable to move or speak, while a trillion-year-old demon uses their bodies as a seat. That's not a cartoon villain being menacing. That's a depiction of something genuinely monstrous, presented in a children's show without comment or apology. And the rest of Weirdmageddon is similarly extreme. Eye bats roam the sky, turning anyone they catch into stone. Bill's henchmen, the interdimensional criminals he freed from the nightmare realm, wreak havoc throughout the town. Buildings rearrange themselves. Animals merge into grotesque hybrid creatures. The sky turns red. The boundary between reality and nightmare dissolves completely. And through all of this, the townspeople of Gravity Falls are helpless. Remember, these are people whose memories have been systematically erased by the Society of the Blind Eye for decades. They've been deliberately kept ignorant of the supernatural forces that surround them. And now, when those forces finally erupt into their reality, they have no framework for understanding what's happening. No preparation. No defenses. They're lambs in a slaughterhouse, and the slaughter was made possible by the very mechanism that was supposed to protect them. That's darkly ironic in a way that I think deserves more attention than it usually gets. McGucket built the memory gun to protect people from the trauma of supernatural encounters. He founded the Society of the Blind Eye to ensure that the citizens of Gravity Falls could live normal lives without being haunted by what they'd seen. But by erasing those memories, he also erased their ability to prepare for a threat they would inevitably face. The protection became the vulnerability. The cure enabled the disease. And then there's the resolution. The way Bill is defeated. I've already mentioned that Stan sacrifices his memories to trap Bill inside his mind so that Ford can erase them both. But I want to focus on what that scene actually depicts, because it's more disturbing than it might seem on first viewing. What happens is this. Ford disguises himself as Stan, and Stan disguises himself as Ford. Bill, trying to get the equation he needs to escape Gravity Falls, enters what he thinks is Ford's mind. But it's actually Stan's. And once Bill is inside, Ford uses the memory gun to erase Stan's entire consciousness. We see this happen. We see Stan's mindscape, the internal landscape of his thoughts and memories, begin to dissolve. We see his memories of Dipper and Mabel disappear. We see the Mystery Shack crumble. We see Stan himself, standing in the middle of his own mind, watching everything he is be consumed by white light. And through it all, Stan knows what's happening. He chose this. He volunteered to have his mind destroyed. And then there's the moment where Bill realizes what's happening. He's trapped. There's no escape. The mind he's in is being erased, and he's going with it. And for the first time in the entire show, Bill Cipher is afraid. Not annoyed, not angry, afraid. The being who destroyed a dimension without remorse is suddenly terrified because he's about to be destroyed himself. And his last act, before the erasure is complete, is to reach out and speak backwards, invoking the name of the axolotl in a desperate bid for survival. A-X-O-L-O-T-L. My time has come to burn. I invoke the ancient power that I may return. Even in his final moment, Bill is making a deal, cutting a bargain, playing an angle. It's who he is. It's who he's always been. The deal maker, the trickster, the one who always finds a way out. And this time, somehow, it works. The Book of Bill confirms that Bill's invocation was successful. The axolotl heard him and gave him another chance. Not freedom, but existence. Not life, but the theraprism. A prison instead of oblivion. And that brings us to something I find genuinely philosophical about Gravity Falls. The show asks a question that it never quite answers directly, but that hangs over everything. Is oblivion worse than suffering? Bill faces this question in his final moment. Stan faces it when he volunteers to lose his memories. McGucket faces it every time he points the memory gun at his own head, and none of them get a clean answer. Stan's memories come back, but there's no guarantee they would have. McGucket's mind is damaged, possibly permanently. And Bill, who chose existence over oblivion, ends up in a prison that sounds worse than death. Gravity Falls doesn't offer easy answers about any of this. It doesn't tell you that sacrifice is always worth it, or that memory is always a blessing, or that survival is always better than the alternative. It presents these impossible choices and lets them sit there, unresolved, for the audience to wrestle with. And that's remarkable for any show, let alone one aimed at children. But there's even more in the Book of Bill that we haven't touched on yet. And some of it is the kind of thing that makes you wonder how it got published at all. The book contains what can only be described as torture scenes. Not cartoonish, exaggerated violence. Detailed, psychologically specific depictions of suffering. Bill's treatment of his victims isn't just cruel, it's personalized. He figures out what each person fears most and designs their punishment around it. With Gideon, it's humiliation. Bill forces Gideon into a cage and makes him perform a cute dance in a sailor costume for eternity. It sounds absurd when you describe it, and it is absurd, but the book makes clear that for Gideon, a character whose entire identity is built on power and control, being reduced to a performing animal was a form of psychological destruction. And afterward, when Gideon tries to talk about what happened, Bill gaslights him. He tells Gideon that he enjoyed it, that the dancing was fun, that Gideon is remembering it wrong. This is a specific and recognizable pattern of abuse. The abuser inflicts suffering and then denies that the suffering occurred. The victim is left doubting their own experience. And the fact that Hirsch wrote this into a Gravity Falls companion book with this level of psychological specificity suggests that he's fully aware of the real-world dynamics he's depicting. This isn't accidental. This isn't a case of a cartoon accidentally resembling something dark. This is deliberate, informed portrayal of abuse. The book also contains Bill's personal commentary on the events of the show, and some of it reveals things that are deeply unsettling. Bill discusses his approach to manipulation with clinical detachment. He explains how he identified Ford's vulnerabilities, how he crafted his persona to appeal to Ford's specific insecurities, how he escalated his control gradually, always maintaining the illusion of partnership while steadily erasing Ford's autonomy. Reading it is like reading a predator's manual. Bill lays out his techniques with pride, as if they're accomplishments, and in a way, they are. Bill is extraordinarily good at what he does. He's good at finding lonely, vulnerable people, making them feel special, and then using that manufactured connection to control them. And the fact that he's proud of it, that he sees no moral dimension to his actions at all, is what makes him truly frightening. Because here's the thing about Bill that separates him from most fictional villains. Bill isn't evil in the way that cartoon villains are usually evil. He doesn't have a diabolical laugh and a desire to rule the world for its own sake. Bill is evil in the way that real abusers are evil. He's charming. He's funny. He makes you feel like you're the most important person in the room. And by the time you realize what he's really doing, you're already trapped. That's why Gravity Falls gets darker on every rewatch. Not because the show adds new darkness each time, but because your understanding deepens. The first time you watch, Bill is a fun villain. The second time, you notice the manipulation. The third time, you recognize the abuse patterns. The fourth time, you start to see the real-world parallels. And by the fifth or sixth time, you're watching a children's show that contains one of the most psychologically accurate portrayals of an abusive relationship in modern media. And if this kind of thoughtful analysis is something you value, subscribing really helps. I know I keep saying it, but it's true. These videos take an enormous amount of research and time to put together, and your support is what makes them possible. Now, let's pull back even further. Let's talk about what it means that all of this exists within a show that aired on the Disney Channel between 2012 and 2016. 40 episodes, 2 seasons. That's all Alex Hirsch had to work with. And in those 40 episodes, he managed to tell stories about identity theft, faked death, homelessness, imprisonment, psychological abuse, memory addiction, systemic gaslighting, child conditioning, generational trauma, dimensional genocide, and existential horror. and he did it while making children laugh. That's the part that I find most remarkable. Gravity Falls isn't a dark show that happens to be funny. It's a funny show that happens to be dark. The humor isn't a mask. It's load-bearing. It's what makes the darkness accessible. It's what allows a 12-year-old to watch Stan's backstory and feel excited rather than devastated. The jokes create emotional distance, a buffer between the viewer and the full weight of what's being depicted. And that buffer is what makes it possible to hide these stories in plain sight. Because the truth is, most kids who watch Gravity Falls don't consciously register the darkness. They see a fun adventure show with cool mysteries and a scary triangle man. They laugh at Stan's cons and Mabel's sweaters and Seuss's earnest confusion. They get excited during Weirdmageddon and they cry at the ending and they move on to the next show. But the darkness is there. It's embedded in the DNA of the show, waiting. And when those same kids come back to Gravity Falls years later, as teenagers or adults, they find a completely different show waiting for them. A show that was always there, hiding under the one they thought they knew. That's brilliant storytelling. But it's also, I think, a kind of kindness. Hirsch isn't trying to traumatize his audience. He's trying to prepare them. He's giving children a framework for understanding difficult concepts: abuse, manipulation, sacrifice, identity, loss, in a context that feels safe. The cartoon provides emotional armor. And when those children eventually encounter these concepts in the real world, as they inevitably will, they'll have a reference point. They'll have a vocabulary. They might even recognize the patterns. Ford's story teaches you what manipulation looks like. Stan's story teaches you what sacrifice costs. McGucket's story teaches you what happens when you run from pain instead of facing it. Pacifica's story teaches you that you don't have to become your family. And Bill's story, perhaps most importantly, teaches you that the most dangerous people are often the most charming. These aren't just good lessons for children. They're essential ones. And the fact that Hirsch embedded them in a show about twin siblings and a triangle demon makes them more accessible, not less meaningful. I think that's what separates Gravity Falls from other shows that try to be dark or mature or complex. A lot of shows wear their darkness on their sleeve. They're dark because darkness is cool, because it signals sophistication, because it differentiates them from the competition. But Gravity Falls isn't dark for the sake of being dark. It's dark because the stories it's telling are true. Abusive relationships are real. Memory loss is real. Family dysfunction is real. Identity crises are real. And Gravity Falls treats these things with a seriousness and a specificity that most adult dramas can't match, while wrapping them in a package that looks like Saturday morning cartoons. Now, before we move on to the final chapters of this story, I want to go back and spend some more time with specific episodes. Because there are moments scattered throughout Gravity Falls that only reveal their true nature on repeated viewings, and some of them are genuinely unsettling in ways that go beyond what we've discussed so far. Let's start with Sock Opera, the 4th episode of Season 2. On the surface, this is a comedy episode. Mabel wants to put on a sock puppet show to impress a boy she likes. Dipper, meanwhile, is trying to crack the password on a mysterious laptop that belonged to the author of the journals. Standard Gravity Falls fare. Funny, charming, and seemingly lightweight. But then, Bill Cipher shows up, and everything changes. Bill approaches Dipper with a deal. He offers to help Dipper unlock the laptop's secrets in exchange for a favor to be named later. Dipper, desperate for answers, agrees. And that's when Bill takes his payment. He doesn't ask for money, or a magical artifact, or some abstract cosmic concession. He takes Dipper's body. Bill possesses Dipper. He takes control of a 12-year-old boy's physical form and immediately begins using it in ways that are deeply disturbing when you think about them. Bill, now wearing Dipper like a suit, marvels at the sensation of having a physical body. He slaps himself. He throws himself downstairs. He pokes himself in the eye. He stabs his arm with a fork. And he laughs through all of it, delighted by the novelty of pain. Now, the show plays this for comedy, and it works as comedy. Jason Ritter's voice, acting as Dipper possessed by Bill, is brilliant, and the physical gags are genuinely funny. But underneath the humor, what you're watching is a supernatural entity deliberately damaging a child's body while the child is trapped inside, helpless to stop it. Dipper is still in there. He can feel everything Bill is doing. He just can't control it. And Bill doesn't just hurt Dipper's body for fun. He uses it strategically. He goes to the theater where Mabel's sock puppet show is happening. He attempts to destroy Journal 3, which contains information that could threaten Bill's plans. He manipulates the people around him by wearing Dipper's face and using Dipper's voice. He turns Dipper's most trusted relationships into tools for his own agenda. This is, again, a form of violation that the show depicts with remarkable sophistication for its target audience. Bill doesn't just borrow Dipper's body, he weaponizes it. He uses it against the people who love Dipper. And the horror of the situation is compounded by the fact that those people don't know what's happening. Mabel doesn't realize that the person walking around in her brother's body isn't her brother. She talks to Bill as Dipper, trusts Bill as Dipper, and has no idea that the real Dipper is screaming silently behind those familiar eyes. On a first viewing, Sock Opera is a fun Halloween season episode with a great villain performance. On a second viewing, it's a story about possession, bodily autonomy, and the terrifying idea that someone could steal your identity so completely that even your twin sister can't tell the difference. And on a third viewing, knowing what Bill later does to Ford, you realize that Sock Opera is a preview. A small-scale rehearsal for the much more extensive and much more damaging possession that Bill inflicted on Ford for months or possibly years before the events of the show. And this is one of the things that makes Bill such an effective villain. He doesn't just appear in a few key episodes. His influence is woven throughout the entire series, and each appearance retroactively darkens the appearances that came before. When you know what Bill is capable of, every scene where he appears becomes more threatening. Even the funny ones. Especially the funny ones. Because Bill's humor is itself a weapon. It makes you let your guard down. It makes you like him. And then he takes your body and throws it down a flight of stairs. But that's not even the strangest part, because there's another episode that gets significantly darker on rewatch, and it's one that most people don't think of as a dark episode at all. I'm talking about The Time Traveler's Pig, the 9th episode of Season 1. In this episode, Dipper discovers a time travel device and uses it to try to undo an embarrassing incident at the town fair. He goes back in time again and again, trying to create the perfect outcome. And the comedy comes from the escalating chaos of his attempts, the butterfly effects that spiral out of control each time he changes something. But here's what's really going on in this episode, underneath the laughs. Dipper is obsessively manipulating time to get what he wants. He's rewriting reality itself, changing the lived experiences of everyone around him without their knowledge or consent. He's playing God with the timeline because he's embarrassed. And the show presents this as a harmless kid's adventure, but the implications are enormous. Every time Dipper changes the timeline, the people around him cease to exist as they were and are replaced by different versions of themselves. Those original versions, the ones who lived through the unchanged timeline, are effectively erased. They don't know it happened. They can't consent to it. They simply stop existing, replaced by alternates who have no memory of the life they replaced. Now, the show doesn't dwell on this implication. It's a comedy episode. But if you take the show's own rules seriously, which the show encourages you to do through its careful world building, then what Dipper does in The Time Traveler's Pig is a form of cosmic violence. He rewrites people's lives without their permission, and the show treats it as acceptable because Dipper's intentions are good. This connects to a broader theme in Gravity Falls that I think is genuinely provocative. The show repeatedly asks whether good intentions justify harmful actions. McGucket invented the memory gun to help people, and it destroyed an entire town's cognitive autonomy. Ford built the portal to expand human knowledge, and it nearly ended the world. Stan stole his brother's identity to save him, and he built a life on lies. And Dipper manipulates time itself because he wants to impress a girl. None of these characters are villains. They're all motivated by things we can sympathize with. Love, curiosity, compassion, the desire to protect the people they care about. But the show refuses to let them off the hook for the consequences. Good intentions, Gravity Falls argues, don't make you immune to doing terrible things. And sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who's absolutely certain they're doing the right thing. But there's another character I haven't talked about enough, and it's someone whose story gets considerably darker the more you think about it. I'm talking about Seuss Ramirez. Seuss is the handyman at the Mystery Shack. He's lovable. He's funny. He's fiercely loyal to Stan and to the twins. He provides comic relief in almost every episode he appears in. And most viewers see him as the show's purest character, the one person in Gravity Falls who seems genuinely uncomplicated and good. But Seuss's backstory is heartbreaking. We learn, primarily in the episode Blindness Game, the 8th episode of Season 2, that Seuss's father abandoned him when he was a child. His father left and never came back. And every year on Seuss's birthday, Seuss would wait for a card or a letter, or some sign that his father remembered he existed. And every year, nothing came. The show reveals this through a time travel adventure, which gives it the usual Gravity Falls blend of comedy and pathos. But strip away the sci-fi elements, and what you have is a story about a child whose father walked out on him and never looked back. A child who spent years waiting for a phone call that never came. A child who eventually had to accept that his father didn't want him. And what makes Seuss's story particularly poignant is how he deals with it. He doesn't become bitter. He doesn't become angry. He just becomes the kindest person in Gravity Falls. He attaches himself to Stan, who becomes a surrogate father figure. He throws himself into his work at the Mystery Shack. He devotes himself to the people around him with an intensity that, once you know his backstory, reads less like natural warmth and more like the desperate need to be needed, to be valuable to someone, to be the kind of person who doesn't get left behind. And the show, to its enormous credit, doesn't resolve this neatly. Seuss's father doesn't come back. There's no tearful reunion. There's no apology. Seuss simply learns, with the help of Dipper and Mabel, to stop waiting, to stop organizing his life around an absence, to find family in the people who actually show up. That's a gutting message for a children's show. Sometimes the person who hurt you isn't coming back. Sometimes there is no closure. Sometimes the best you can do is stop letting the wound define you and start building something new in the space where the pain used to be. And Seuss does that. He takes the Mystery Shack, the job that started as just a way to be near a father figure, and makes it his own. By the end of the series, Stan officially hands the Mystery Shack over to Seuss, and it's one of the most quietly powerful moments in the show. A man who was abandoned by his father inherits a home from the man who chose to be his family. It's beautiful, but it's also built on a foundation of abandonment and loss that makes it ache even as it heals. Now, while we're talking about characters whose darkness sneaks up on you, I want to address something about Mabel that I think is really important and often overlooked. Because Mabel Pines, for all her brightness and optimism, has a story that contains some genuinely troubling elements. Mabel is the emotional core of the show. She's the one who brings joy and creativity and silliness to every situation. She's the counterbalance to Dipper's obsessive seriousness. And she's one of the most beloved characters in modern animation. But the show, particularly in its second season, asks some very difficult questions about Mabel's character that don't have comfortable answers. The central one is this: what happens when optimism becomes avoidance? Mabel's response to difficulty is almost always to retreat into fantasy. When things get hard, she makes sweaters. She stages puppet shows. She creates elaborate romantic scenarios. She throws herself into projects that allow her to avoid confronting whatever's actually wrong. And for most of the show, this works. Her optimism genuinely helps. Her creativity genuinely solves problems. Her refusal to give up is genuinely inspiring. But then, Weirdmageddon happens. And in part 2, Escape from Reality, Mabel is trapped in a prison of her own making. Bill captures her and places her inside a bubble, a pocket dimension called Mabeland, where everything is perfect. Every fantasy she's ever had comes true. There's no conflict, no sadness, no difficulty of any kind. It's an eternal sugar rush of wish fulfillment. And Mabel doesn't want to leave. That's the dark twist of the episode. The bubble isn't just a prison. It's a temptation. Mabeland gives Mabel exactly what she wants. A world where nothing bad ever happens, and she has to consciously choose to reject it. She has to choose reality, with all its pain and imperfection, over a fantasy that's designed specifically to make her happy. The show treats this as a triumph when Mabel finally chooses to leave. And it is. But on a rewatch, the scene takes on a more unsettling quality. Because the bubble didn't create Mabel's desire to escape reality. It exploited a desire that was already there. Mabel's entire approach to life, her relentless positivity, her avoidance of difficult emotions, her tendency to prioritize fun over responsibility, all of it was, in a sense, building toward this moment. The bubble didn't trap Mabel. It gave her what she'd always been looking for. And the fact that she has to fight her way out of something she genuinely wants is what makes the scene so powerful and so disturbing. Because here's the question the show is asking. Is relentless optimism a form of denial? Is refusing to engage with darkness a kind of darkness in itself? Mabel's strength, her ability to find joy in any situation, is also her weakness. It's the thing that makes her vulnerable to the bubble. And the show suggests, gently but unmistakably, that true growth requires not just the ability to find happiness, but the willingness to face unhappiness, to sit with discomfort, to accept that some things can't be made better with glitter and enthusiasm. And if you're finding these layers as fascinating as I do, and you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It means more than you might think. These long videos take weeks to put together, and every subscriber is a vote of confidence that this kind of content matters. We've still got a lot of ground to cover tonight. Now, I want to return to something I mentioned earlier and really expand on it, because I think it's one of the most underappreciated aspects of the show's darkness. I'm talking about Journal 3, the physical book that Hirsch and his team published as a real-world artifact. In the show, Journal 3 is the book that Dipper finds in the first episode. It's written by the author, who we later learn is Stanford Pines, and it documents the strange creatures and phenomena of Gravity Falls. In the show, it's a plot device, a source of information that drives the mystery forward. But the published version of Journal 3, the real book you can hold in your hands, tells a story that the show only hints at. And that story is the slow disintegration of Stanford Pines' mind. The early entries in Journal 3 are meticulous. The handwriting is neat. The illustrations are detailed and carefully labeled. The scientific observations are precise. This is the work of a man in full control of his faculties, approaching the supernatural with the rigor and discipline of a trained researcher. He's cataloging. He's theorizing. He's drawing conclusions based on evidence. It's genuinely beautiful work. But as the journal progresses, things change. The handwriting becomes less controlled. The entries become shorter, more fragmented. The illustrations grow rougher, less precise. Ford starts making mistakes, misspelling words he would have caught before, getting facts wrong that he'd previously documented correctly. The margins fill with scrawled notes that seem disconnected from the main entries, tangential observations, paranoid warnings, and increasingly desperate pleas to himself to stay awake. Stay awake, that detail is crucial, because as we know, Bill enters Ford's mind when Ford sleeps, and Ford, realizing this, tries to stop sleeping entirely. The journal documents his descent into sleep deprivation, with a specificity that's genuinely disturbing. He writes about the hallucinations, the tremors, the loss of fine motor control. He writes about seeing things that aren't there, or that he thinks aren't there, because how can he be sure anymore? Bill has so thoroughly compromised his sense of reality that Ford can no longer trust his own perceptions. And then there's the blacklight edition of Journal 3, a special version of the book that reveals hidden content when you shine a UV light on the pages. And what the blacklight reveals is extraordinary and deeply unsettling. There are entries written by Bill himself, messages left during the periods when Bill controlled Ford's body. These entries are in Bill's distinctive all-caps handwriting, and they range from mocking commentary on Ford's weakness to chilling reminders that Bill is always watching. Some pages contain drawings that Ford didn't make, images that appear to have been created while Ford was unconscious, by hands that Ford couldn't control. The blacklight edition also reveals that Ford drew eyes around every person in the journal, every face, every figure, surrounded by tiny, carefully drawn eyes. It's a visual representation of paranoia so complete that it saturates every page. Ford trusted no one, suspected everyone, and he expressed that suspicion not through words, but through obsessive, repetitive imagery that only becomes visible under ultraviolet light. This is a document of a mind being dismantled from the inside. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, page by page, entry by entry. The Ford who begins Journal 3 is not the Ford who ends it. And the transformation isn't just sad, it's clinical. It reads like the case file of a patient in decline. And the cause of that decline isn't disease or age. It's another being, deliberately and systematically destroying Ford's ability to function. When you hold the physical Journal 3 in your hands and flip through those pages, watching the handwriting deteriorate, watching the paranoia accumulate, watching a brilliant mind come apart at the seams, you're holding evidence of abuse. That's what it is. Not metaphorically, not thematically. Actually, Bill's treatment of Ford is abuse, and Journal 3 is the documentation of its effects. Now, let me take us into territory that I think most Gravity Falls analyses skip over too quickly. I want to talk about the town of Gravity Falls itself, not the characters, the town. Because there's something deeply wrong with Gravity Falls, Oregon, and it goes beyond the supernatural activity. Gravity Falls is a town where strange things happen constantly. Gnomes live in the forest. A lake monster swims in the reservoir. Ghosts haunt the convenience store. A shapeshifter sleeps in a hidden bunker. And none of the residents know any of this because their memories have been systematically erased. But here's what I find truly disturbing about Gravity Falls as a setting. Even without the memory erasure, the town is a place where dysfunction is normalized. Look at the adults in the show. Stan is a con man who lies to everyone around him. The police force, represented by Sheriff Blubbs and Deputy Durland, is completely incompetent. The mayor, Mayor Tyler, is an easily manipulated figurehead. The media, represented by Toby Determined, is a joke. The richest family in town, the Northwests, are built on exploitation and lies. There is no functioning institution in Gravity Falls. No one the children can turn to for reliable help. No adult who has both the awareness and the capability to deal with the threats the town faces. Gravity Falls is, structurally, a failed state. A community where every system that should protect its citizens has been compromised, corrupted, or rendered useless. And this isn't just world building for the sake of comedy, although it works as comedy. It's a deliberate choice that serves the show's themes. Gravity Falls is a place where children are forced to deal with adult-level threats because the adults can't or won't do it themselves. Dipper and Mabel don't seek adventure. They're thrust into it because nobody else is capable of handling what's happening. They become heroes by default, not by choice. And that's a very specific and very dark kind of narrative. Because in a world where the institutions have failed, where the adults are compromised, where the systems of protection don't work, the burden falls on the most vulnerable people, the children. And that burden changes them in ways that the show is unflinching about depicting. Dipper becomes paranoid. He develops an obsession with mysteries and secrets that mirrors Ford's own destructive compulsions. He pushes away the people who care about him in pursuit of answers. He makes dangerous deals with entities he doesn't understand. He is, in many ways, following the same path that led Ford to ruin. And the show is aware of this parallel. It draws it explicitly. Ford sees himself in Dipper and tries to warn him, but the warning comes too late, or too quietly, to prevent Dipper from walking to the edge of the same abyss. Mabel retreats into fantasy. As we discussed, her coping mechanism is to refuse to engage with darkness, to cover everything in glitter and enthusiasm, and hope that the problems will go away if she smiles hard enough. And the show shows us, through the Mabeland bubble, where that coping mechanism ultimately leads. Not to happiness, but to a prison you build for yourself. These aren't just character flaws played for drama. They're realistic trauma responses. Dipper hypervigilates. Mabel avoids. And both of them are doing it because they're children who have been placed in situations that no child should have to face. The show is, underneath everything else, a story about the psychological toll of forced maturity. About what happens when the world demands too much of you too soon. And here's where I want to bring in something that doesn't get discussed nearly enough. The relationship between Dipper and Ford. When Ford emerges from the portal in Not What He Seems, Dipper is immediately drawn to him. And why wouldn't he be? Ford is everything Dipper wants to be. He's brilliant. He's brave. He's the author, the person who wrote the journal that changed Dipper's life. And most importantly, Ford takes Dipper seriously. He treats Dipper like an intellectual equal. He offers to take Dipper on as his apprentice. On a first viewing, this relationship is heartwarming. Finally, Dipper has found someone who understands him, someone who values his curiosity and his intelligence, someone who doesn't treat him like a kid. But on a rewatch, knowing Ford's history, the relationship becomes something much more complicated. Because Ford's mentorship of Dipper is, intentionally or not, a repetition of what Bill did to Ford. Think about it. Bill approached Ford by telling him he was special, that his intellect set him apart, that he was destined for something greater than ordinary life. And Bill used that flattery to isolate Ford from the people who cared about him. Ford approaches Dipper in almost exactly the same way. He tells Dipper he's exceptional. He implies that Dipper's curiosity makes him different from, and in some ways better than, the people around him. And his offer of apprenticeship would require Dipper to stay in Gravity Falls permanently, separating him from Mabel. The show is not subtle about this parallel. It's explicitly addressed in Dipper and Mabel versus the Future, where Ford's offer to make Dipper his apprentice forces Dipper to choose between Ford's world and Mabel's. And the conflict that arises from that choice is one of the catalysts for Weirdmageddon itself. Ford isn't being malicious. Unlike Bill, Ford genuinely cares about Dipper, but he's unconsciously recreating the dynamic that destroyed him. He's doing to Dipper what Bill did to him, identifying a vulnerable, intellectually gifted person, making them feel special, and drawing them away from their support system. The abuse Ford suffered at Bill's hands has become a pattern he can't see himself repeating, and that's one of the most sophisticated things the show does. It shows how trauma doesn't just damage the person who experiences it. It changes how they relate to everyone who comes after. This is generational trauma operating in real time, not across decades, like the Northwest's. Across the span of a single summer. Ford was isolated and manipulated by Bill, and now Ford, without meaning to, threatens to isolate and manipulate Dipper. The cycle doesn't need generations to repeat itself. Sometimes it only takes one mentor and one eager student. Now there's something else I want to explore, and it requires us to go back to the very beginning of the show's mythology. I want to talk about the town of Gravity Falls itself, specifically, why it exists. Why is this particular spot in Oregon a magnet for supernatural activity? Why does reality seem thinner here than anywhere else? The show provides an answer, though it's scattered across multiple episodes and supplementary materials. Gravity Falls sits on a natural anomaly. The weirdness of the town isn't caused by any single event or entity. It's intrinsic to the location. The town is built on a place where the boundaries between dimensions are naturally weak. This is why the forest is full of strange creatures. This is why time behaves oddly. This is why Bill Cipher was drawn to this specific spot when he was looking for someone to build his portal. But what the show implies, without ever quite stating directly, is that the anomaly may be getting worse. The supernatural activity in Gravity Falls seems to have intensified over time, with the most dramatic escalation coinciding with Ford's arrival and his research into the anomaly. Ford didn't just study the weirdness. He poked at it. He probed it. He opened doors that were closed for good reason. And the portal he built, the machine that sucked him into another dimension, may have permanently widened the cracks. This is another instance of the show's central theme, the cost of knowledge. Ford's research into the anomaly didn't just attract Bill's attention. It may have destabilized the fabric of reality in Gravity Falls permanently. The weird things that Dipper and Mabel encounter throughout the show aren't just natural phenomena. Some of them may be direct consequences of Ford's work. The author of the journals, the man whose research Dipper idolizes, may have been the cause of many of the dangers the show documents. And if you think about it, that makes Journal 3 not just a guide to the supernatural. It's a confession. A record of the damage one man's curiosity inflicted on an entire community. Every creature Ford cataloged, every anomaly he documented, every danger he mapped. Some of those things might not have existed if he'd left the anomaly alone. The journals aren't just science. They're evidence. That's another layer of darkness that only becomes visible on rewatching. Dipper treasures Journal 3 as a source of wisdom and adventure. But Journal 3 is also an account of the ways in which Ford made Gravity Falls more dangerous for everyone who lived there. The book that Dipper sees as a guide to the mysteries of the universe is also a record of one man's hubris and the consequences that everyone else had to pay. And speaking of consequences, let me bring us to something that I think deserves much more attention than it typically receives. I want to talk about Into the Bunker, the second episode of Season 2, and specifically about the Shapeshifter. The Shapeshifter, designated Experiment 210 in Ford's research, is one of the most disturbing creatures in the entire show. It's an entity that can perfectly replicate any form it has seen, including voice, mannerisms, and body language. When Dipper, Mabel, Seuss, and Wendy discover Ford's underground bunker and accidentally release the Shapeshifter, it immediately begins using their own forms against them. On the surface, this is a Monster of the Week episode, a scary creature, a tense action sequence, a narrow escape. But the Shapeshifter represents something deeper. It's the show's most literal embodiment of the theme of deception. Here is a creature that can wear anyone's face, steal anyone's voice, and use someone's own identity as a weapon against them. Sound familiar? It should, because that's exactly what Bill Cipher does, just on a cosmic scale rather than a biological one. The Shapeshifter episode is also significant for what it reveals about Ford's research methods. Ford found the Shapeshifter as an egg. He raised it. He studied it. He gave it access to the journals, which allowed it to see and learn hundreds of different forms. And when it became too dangerous, he froze it in a cryogenic tube and sealed it in the bunker. Ford's relationship with the Shapeshifter parallels his relationship with Bill in miniature. He found something fascinating and powerful. He studied it without fully understanding the risks. He gave it access to more information than was wise, and when it turned against him, he had to use extreme measures to contain it. Ford keeps making the same mistake. He keeps approaching dangerous things with a scientist's curiosity and a blind spot for personal risk. And every time, the people around him suffer the consequences. The shapeshifter has one more moment that's worth discussing. As it's being frozen, it shifts into a form designed to terrify Dipper. It takes on what it claims will be the form of the person who will ultimately defeat Dipper, presumably the last thing Dipper will ever see. And it freezes in a grotesque, nightmarish version of a human face, mouth open in a scream, eyes wide with malice. That frozen face remains in the bunker for the rest of the series. It's never addressed again, but it's there, sealed underground, waiting. A screaming prediction of doom, trapped in ice, hidden beneath a town where memory itself has been weaponized. Just another layer of the darkness that sits beneath the surface of Gravity Falls, never quite visible, but always present. Let me pause here for a moment to talk about something that I think ties a lot of these threads together, and that's the concept of deals. Gravity Falls is obsessed with deals. Bill makes deals. Stan makes deals. Ford makes deals. Gideon makes deals. Even Dipper and Mabel make deals. The entire economy of the show's supernatural world runs on bargains, exchanges, and the fine print that nobody reads. And the show is very clear about one thing. Deals always cost more than they promise. Bill offers knowledge in exchange for a puppet body. Ford gains scientific insight at the cost of his autonomy. Stan trades his identity for a chance to save his brother. McGucket trades his memories for peace of mind. Gideon trades his soul for power. Every deal in Gravity Falls is a trap, not because the other party is dishonest, but because the terms are always worse than they appear. This is, I think, the show's most trenchant observation about the nature of power. Power in Gravity Falls doesn't come from strength or intelligence. It comes from information asymmetry. Bill wins because he knows more than the people he's dealing with. The Northwests maintain their dynasty because they control information about the town's history. The Society of the Blind Eye exercises control by literally erasing information from people's minds. And the way to resist power, the show argues, is through transparency. The moments of genuine heroism in Gravity Falls are moments of honesty. Stan confessing his identity. Pacifica opening the mansion gates. McGucket confronting his lost memories. Ford admitting that he was manipulated. These moments of truth-telling are presented as more powerful, more transformative than any magical artifact or supernatural ability. The show's final message, distilled to its essence, is this: the most dangerous thing in the world is a secret, and the most powerful thing in the world is the truth. And the space between those two things, the gap between what we hide and what we reveal, is where all the darkness of Gravity Falls lives. And if that message resonates with you, if this is the kind of thoughtful analysis that makes your day a little more interesting, subscribing really does keep us going. We're deep into this now, and I appreciate every single one of you who's still here. Now let's go somewhere really specific and really dark. I want to talk about the timeline of Fiddleford McGucket's decline in more detail than we did earlier, because I think the specifics are important for understanding just how devastating his story really is. We know that McGucket came to Gravity Falls in the early 1980s to help Ford with the Portal project. He was, at that point, a genius engineer with a wife and a young son. He was stable. He was talented. He was, by all accounts, a good man who wanted to help his friend achieve something extraordinary. The problems began when McGucket looked through the portal. We don't know exactly what he saw, but the show makes clear that it was something that shattered his sense of reality. Something so far beyond normal human experience that his mind couldn't process it. And in the aftermath of that experience, Ford's response was to dismiss McGucket's terror and pressure him to keep working. This is important. Ford didn't force McGucket to keep working, but he also didn't take his concerns seriously. He was so consumed by the Portal project, so deep into Bill's influence, that he treated McGucket's psychological collapse as an inconvenience rather than a crisis. And when McGucket finally quit, Ford let him go without attempting to help him process what he'd seen. McGucket was left alone with a mind full of horrors and no support system to help him deal with them. His wife, Emma May, was back home. His son, Tate, was growing up without him. And the one person who might have been able to help, Ford, was too far gone to care. So McGucket built the memory gun, and the first time he used it, by his own account, it worked perfectly. The traumatic memory was gone. The terror was gone. He felt normal again. And that relief, that sudden absence of pain, was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to him. Because addiction doesn't start with the substance. It starts with the relief. And McGucket had found the ultimate relief, the ability to simply delete the things that hurt. Why struggle with a memory when you can erase it? Why process trauma when you can simply remove it from your brain? The memory gun offered a shortcut past pain, and McGucket took it. Again, and again, and again. The show gives us a timeline of his decline through recovered footage from the Blind Eye Society's archives. In the earliest footage, McGucket is coherent but distressed. He's using the gun deliberately, targeting specific memories with precision. He knows what he's erasing and why. In later footage, maybe months or a year later, the precision is gone. McGucket is using the gun reflexively. Something scares him, and he reaches for the gun before he even fully understands what he's afraid of. The tool has become a reflex, a coping mechanism so deeply ingrained that it bypasses conscious decision-making entirely. And in the final footage, McGucket is barely recognizable. His speech is fragmented. His behavior is erratic. He appears to be using the gun on himself multiple times in rapid succession, as if trying to erase something that keeps coming back. Or as if he's forgotten that he already erased it. Or as if the act of erasure itself has become the compulsion, divorced from any specific memory that needs to be forgotten. This is a portrayal of addiction that is both metaphorical and disturbingly literal. McGucket is addicted to forgetting. He's addicted to the sensation of pain disappearing. And like any addiction, it requires increasingly frequent use to achieve the same effect, while simultaneously causing more damage with each use. The memory gun is McGucket's substance, and his brain is both the target and the casualty. And the consequences extend beyond McGucket himself. Because in his deteriorating state, he founded the Society of the Blind Eye and began erasing other people's memories too. He extended his addiction to the entire town. And those people, unlike McGucket, didn't choose to have their memories erased. They were identified by the society, approached by its members, and subjected to the memory gun without full informed consent. Some of them were grateful, at least initially. The show mentions people who wanted to forget Gideon's tantrums, or Chandra Jimenez's rejections, or their own fears and regrets. But grateful or not, they were still having their cognitive autonomy violated by an organization led by a man who could barely remember his own name. And here's the detail that I find most haunting of all. By the time the events of the show take place, McGucket has forgotten that he founded the society. He's erased so much of his own memory that he doesn't know the Blind Eye exists. He doesn't know he invented the memory gun. He doesn't know he's the architect of the town's collective amnesia. The man who created the system has been consumed by it. That's not just a sad story about a character in a cartoon. That's a profound statement about the nature of institutional harm. The systems we create to manage our pain can outlive our understanding of them. They can continue operating long after their creators have forgotten why they were built. And the people who suffer most from those systems are often the people they were originally designed to help. Now, I want to talk about a scene that, to this day, gives me pause every time I think about it. It's from Northwest Mansion Mystery, and it's not the ghost or the blood raining from the walls or the taxidermied animal heads coming to life, although all of those things are certainly disturbing. It's the moment when Preston Northwest rings the bell. I described this earlier, but I want to go deeper into what it represents, because I think it's one of the most important moments in the entire show. Preston rings a small silver bell, and Pacifica stops mid-sentence. Her entire demeanor changes. She goes from animated and defiant to quiet and obedient in less than a second. It's instantaneous, automatic, irresistible. She doesn't choose to comply. Her body complies for her. The response has been trained into her so deeply that it bypasses her will entirely. This is classical conditioning. Specifically, it's a form of aversive conditioning, where a stimulus, in this case the bell, has been paired with punishment so many times that the mere sound of the stimulus triggers a submission response. Pacifica's parents have been doing this to her since she was young enough to be shaped by it. They've turned their daughter into an obedient tool through the systematic application of psychological control. And the show doesn't explain this in clinical terms. It doesn't have a character name the technique or discuss the psychology behind it. It just shows you. It shows you a father ringing a bell and a daughter going silent. And it trusts you to understand what you're seeing. That trust, that willingness to depict something deeply disturbing without explaining it away, is one of the bravest things about Gravity Falls. A lesser show would have a character say something like, "That's terrible, you can't treat your daughter that way." Gravity Falls just shows the bell, shows the silence, and moves on. And the silence is worse than any speech could be. On a rewatch, every scene with Pacifica before Northwest Mansion Mystery changes. Every moment where she's mean to Mabel, every instance of her snobbery and cruelty gets recontextualized. This isn't a girl who's spoiled. This is a girl who's controlled. Her cruelty toward others is a mirror of the cruelty inflicted on her. She treats people the way she's been treated, as things to be managed, manipulated, and silenced when they become inconvenient. And her arc, the journey from antagonist to ally, isn't just character development. It's recovery. Pacifica learning to defy her parents, learning to open the gates, learning to choose kindness over conditioning. That's a story about a person recognizing their own programming and choosing to overwrite it. And anyone who has ever had to unlearn the behaviors that their family taught them knows how hard that is, how frightening, how lonely. The Book of Bill takes Pacifica's trauma even further, as we discussed. Her nightmares about blood on her hands, the cardboard cutout family, the destruction she causes by simply existing. These aren't just bad dreams. They're the psychological architecture of a young woman who has been taught, from birth, that her family's legacy is her identity, and that identity is built on harm. She's not afraid of monsters. She's afraid of being a monster. And the most terrifying thing about that fear is that she has no idea if it's justified. That's real psychological horror. Not jump scares, not gore. The quiet, persistent terror of wondering if you're a bad person because of where you come from. The fear that the damage in your blood is inescapable. That you are, inevitably, what your family made you. Gravity Falls doesn't answer that question for Pacifica, and that's appropriate, because the answer isn't something anyone else can give you. It's something you have to discover for yourself, through the choices you make when nobody's watching, through the doors you choose to open when everyone tells you to keep them shut. And that's really the heart of what makes Gravity Falls so much more than a cartoon. It's asking questions that don't have easy answers. It's presenting characters whose damage is real and whose healing is uncertain. And it's doing all of this in 22-minute episodes that are also, somehow, genuinely hilarious. Now, I want to take us even deeper into Bill's mythology, because there are aspects of his story that we haven't fully explored yet, and they're some of the most philosophically interesting elements of the entire show. We talked about Euclidia, Bill's home dimension. We talked about how he destroyed it. But I want to focus on something specific about Bill's experience before the destruction, because I think it illuminates everything that comes after. Bill could see the third dimension, No one else in Euclidia could. He perceived a reality that was invisible to everyone around him. And when he tried to share this perception, when he tried to tell people about the dimension he could see, he was told he was wrong. He was told he was sick. He was, depending on which source you consult, potentially medicated or institutionally confined because of his insistence on describing something real. This is a story about the pathologization of truth. Bill could see something that was genuinely there. The third dimension exists. His perception was accurate. But because no one else could verify it, his perception was classified as delusion. And the response of his society was not to investigate whether he might be right, but to suppress his claims and treat his difference as illness. Now, I want to be very careful here, because this is the kind of backstory that can easily be misread as sympathy for the villain. And I don't want to do that. Bill Cipher is a monster. He tortures people. He destroys worlds. He manipulates and controls and gaslights. Nothing about his origin story excuses any of that. But, and this is important, understanding why someone becomes a monster matters. Not because it excuses them, but because it reveals the conditions that create monsters. And the conditions that created Bill, being different, being right, being punished for it, being told that your perception of reality is wrong, those conditions are not unique to a fictional, two-dimensional universe. Those conditions exist in our world too. And the question Gravity Falls asks, implicitly but unmistakably, is, what do we do to people who see things differently? Bill's response to being pathologized was rage. He decided that if his world couldn't handle the truth, his world didn't deserve to exist, and he destroyed it. That's the worst possible response. It's the response of a being so consumed by resentment that they'd rather burn everything down than accept that the world is unfair. But the show doesn't pretend that Bill's grievance was imaginary. His world really was wrong about the third dimension. His people really did suppress his perception. The injustice was real. And Gravity Falls, unlike most children's shows, is willing to sit with the discomfort of that complexity. Bill is wrong in his response, but he wasn't wrong about what he saw. This moral complexity is what makes Bill Cipher one of the great villains in animation history. He's not evil in a vacuum. He's evil because of a specific history that makes his evil comprehensible. And the axolotl's poem about him, the one that says he misses home and can't return, that he says he's happy but he's a liar, that line about blaming the arson for the fire, all of it paints a picture of a being who is in pain. Enormous, cosmic, trillion-year-old pain that he's turned outward because he can't bear to turn it inward. And here's the really provocative question that the show asks through Bill. Is there any point at which a being becomes so damaged that they can no longer choose to be good? Bill has been carrying the weight of a destroyed dimension for longer than the human species has existed. He's been alone with his guilt and his grief for an incomprehensible span of time. At what point does that kind of damage become permanent? At what point does the capacity for empathy simply atrophy from disuse? The show doesn't answer this question, but it asks it. And the fact that it asks it about a villain in a children's cartoon is what separates Gravity Falls from virtually every other show in its category. And you know, if this is the kind of deep exploration that adds something to your day, I genuinely appreciate you subscribing. It's the single best way to support what we do here. We're nearing the final stretch of this deep dive, and there's still some really important ground to cover. Let me bring us now to Weirdmageddon in more detail than we covered it before. Because the final arc of Gravity Falls, spanning the last 3 episodes of the series, is where every thread the show has been weaving comes together. And the darkness, which has been building slowly for 40 episodes, finally erupts into something that's almost overwhelming. Weirdmageddon begins in episode 18 of season 2, when Mabel accidentally gives the interdimensional rift to Bill. This happens because of the conflict between Dipper and Mabel over Ford's apprenticeship offer. Mabel, feeling abandoned by her brother, takes the rift, and Blandon, possessed by Bill, convinces her to hand it over. Bill cracks the rift open, and reality breaks. What follows is the most sustained nightmare sequence in Disney Channel history. The sky tears open. A pyramid descends. Bill Cipher, now in his full physical form, enormous, golden, and radiating power, reshapes Gravity Falls according to his will. The laws of physics become suggestions. Gravity reverses. Time stutters. And the creatures of the nightmare realm, interdimensional beings who have been imprisoned in the void between dimensions, pour into our world. The imagery during Weirdmageddon is consistently more graphic and more disturbing than anything that came before it. Eye bats patrol the sky, turning anyone they catch into stone. The stone people are conscious, but immobilized, frozen in whatever pose they were in when they were caught. Some of them are frozen mid-scream. Some are frozen mid-run, caught in the act of trying to flee something that was already too fast for them. And then there's the throne. We talked about it earlier, but I want to emphasize something about it that I think gets lost in the general discussion of the scene. The throne isn't just an arrangement of bodies. It's artistic. Bill has deliberately posed the frozen citizens of Gravity Falls into a shape that pleases him. He's arranged human beings like furniture, positioning their limbs and torsos to create armrests and backrests and footrests. He's treating sentient beings as craft supplies, as raw material for interior decoration. And he sits on it. He sits on a chair made of people and makes jokes. He throws a party. He invites the monsters of the nightmare realm to celebrate the end of the world while sitting on a throne made of screaming frozen humans. The contrast between the party atmosphere and the suffering of the throne's occupants is one of the most viscerally disturbing things in the show. It's festive cruelty, celebratory horror, and it's played with a casualness that makes it worse, because Bill genuinely doesn't see anything wrong with what he's doing. That's the key to understanding Bill during Weirdmageddon. He's not performing cruelty for effect. He's not being dramatic. He genuinely believes that his actions are either neutral or positive. He's freed the monsters from the nightmare realm, hasn't he? He's created a world without rules, without limits, without the boring constraints of physical law. In his mind, Weirdmageddon is liberation. The fact that liberation involves turning human beings into furniture is, to Bill, an irrelevant detail. This is the nihilism at the core of Bill's character rendered in its most extreme form. Not the intellectual nihilism of philosophers, but the operational nihilism of a being who has been so damaged for so long that the suffering of others has become genuinely imperceptible to him. Bill doesn't ignore other people's pain. He can't see it. It doesn't register as meaningful data. And that makes him far more frightening than a villain who delights in suffering, because at least a sadist acknowledges that suffering is real. Bill doesn't even get that far. But Weirdmageddon has another component that I think is even darker than Bill's cosmic tyranny, and it's Mabeland. We talked about the bubble that traps Mabel, but I want to focus on what the bubble reveals about Bill's understanding of human psychology. Because Bill created Mabeland. He designed it. He built a prison specifically tailored to Mabel's desires, a world that gives her everything she wants so perfectly that she won't want to leave. That means Bill studied Mabel. He analyzed her. He figured out exactly what she craved most: an endless summer, a world without consequences, a place where growing up never happens. And he used that understanding to build a cage she'd walk into willingly. This is the same technique he used on Ford, just applied to a different person. Find the vulnerability. Build a world around it. Make the cage so comfortable that the prisoner defends it. Bill doesn't need chains. He needs insight. He needs to understand what you want so deeply that he can give it to you. And once you have it, you'll imprison yourself. That's terrifying. Not because of what it says about Bill, but because of what it says about us. We all have a Mabeland. We all have a fantasy we'd disappear into if we could. A version of reality that's been cleaned up, smoothed out, stripped of everything that hurts. And the show asks, If someone offered you that fantasy, permanently, with no catch that you could see, would you take it? Mabel almost does. She almost stays. And the fact that she doesn't, the fact that she chooses messy, painful, uncertain reality over perfect fantasy, is one of the most quietly heroic moments in the show. Not because she fights a monster, not because she solves a puzzle, but because she makes the harder choice. She chooses truth over comfort. And that choice, the show argues, is what growing up actually is. Now, I need to talk about the final battle. The actual confrontation with Bill in Weirdmageddon Part 3, Take Back the Falls. The citizens of Gravity Falls, freed from their stone prisons by the efforts of Dipper, Mabel, and their friends, come together for one final stand. They pilot the Shacktron, a giant robot made from the Mystery Shack itself, and they attack Bill's pyramid. It's a classic David versus Goliath scenario, and it's thrilling. But the plan to stop Bill hinges on the Zodiac, the prophecy that Ford discovered, the one represented by the wheel in the opening credits. If the 10 people corresponding to the 10 symbols stand in the wheel and join hands, they'll generate enough power to banish Bill permanently. And the plan almost works. Almost. The 10 people gather. They stand in position. They begin to join hands. And then Stan and Ford start arguing. Right there, in the wheel, with the fate of reality hanging in the balance, the Pines brothers let their decades of resentment and hurt erupt into a fight. They break the circle. The Zodiac fails. And Bill, seizing the moment, attacks. This is, to me, one of the most devastating moments in the show. Not because it's surprising, but because it's inevitable. Of course, Stan and Ford fight. They've been fighting their entire lives. They were fighting when Ford fell through the portal. They were fighting when Stan arrived in Gravity Falls. And now, at the one moment when their cooperation could save the world, they can't stop fighting. The Zodiac doesn't fail because of Bill's power. It fails because of human weakness. Specifically, the weakness of two brothers who love each other but can't stop hurting each other. The world almost ends, not because the villain is too strong, but because the heroes can't put their damage aside long enough to do what needs to be done. And that's such a human failure. Such a recognizable, painful, ordinary failure. How many relationships have been destroyed by the inability to stop fighting at the critical moment? How many families have been torn apart because two people who love each other can't get out of their own way? The Zodiac scene takes a cosmic conflict and grounds it in the most mundane of human failings, the inability to forgive. And so the Zodiac fails, and Plan B becomes necessary. And Plan B is Stan's sacrifice. We've discussed the mechanics of it. Stan tricks Bill into entering his mind. Ford erases Stan's mind. Bill is destroyed. But I want to focus on the emotional logic of the sacrifice, because I think it's the most important scene in the entire show. Stan volunteers to sacrifice his mind. He does this knowing what it will cost. He does it knowing that he'll lose his memories of Dipper and Mabel. He does it knowing that he'll lose himself. And he does it because, for the first time in his life, he has something worth losing. This is the terrible irony of Stan's arc. For 30 years, he had nothing. No identity, no family, no love. He was an empty vessel, a stolen name attached to a desperate mission. And then Dipper and Mabel arrived, and for one summer, Stan got to be a person. A real person. Someone who was loved for who he actually was, even if that identity was hidden under a false name. And then he gave it up. Not because he wanted to, because the only way to save the people he loves is to destroy his ability to love them. The only way to protect his family is to forget that they exist. If that's not the darkest thing in Gravity Falls, I don't know what is. It's not Bill's cruelty, or the Northwest's corruption, or McGucket's self-destruction. It's the idea that love might require you to annihilate the capacity for love. that the ultimate act of caring might be the erasure of the thing that cares. And the show gives us the aftermath. We see Stan, post-erasure, sitting in a chair, blank-eyed, not recognizing the people around him. We see Mabel trying to trigger his memories by showing him her scrapbook. We see the family gathered around a man who looks like their uncle, but isn't, because everything that made him their uncle has been stripped away. And then, slowly, the memories start coming back. A fragment here, a recognition there. Stan sees the scrapbook and something flickers. He hears Mabel's voice and something stirs. The memories return, not all at once, not completely, but enough. Enough for Stan to be Stan again. Enough for the family to be whole. It's a happy ending, sort of. But on a rewatch, you can't help but wonder, how much didn't come back? What memories were lost permanently? The show doesn't address this. It gives us the triumph of Stan's return and lets us celebrate without asking too many questions. But the questions are there, hovering at the edges of the happy ending like shadows that won't quite disperse. And that's Gravity Falls in a nutshell. A show that gives you happy endings and then makes you wonder if they're really happy. A show that resolves its plots, but not its implications. A show that answers its mysteries, but creates new uncertainties in the process. I want to take a few more minutes to talk about the axolotl, because this entity represents perhaps the deepest and most mysterious layer of the Gravity Falls mythology, and its implications are genuinely mind-bending. The axolotl appears in the expanded Gravity Falls universe, primarily in supplementary books and in Bill's final moments during the series. It's described as an immensely powerful being, possibly the most powerful entity in the Gravity Falls cosmology, existing outside of normal dimensional space. And its relationship with Bill Cipher is one of the most fascinating and least understood elements of the lore. Bill invokes the axolotl's name as he's being erased, calling out for a second chance. And according to the Book of Bill, the axolotl heard him. The axolotl gave Bill an audience and offered him a deal: reincarnation, a new form, and a new beginning, in exchange for mandatory rehabilitation in the Theraprism. What's significant about this is that the axolotl is, as far as we can tell, the only entity in the Gravity Falls universe that has power over Bill. Time Baby is powerful, but Bill destroyed him casually. The various magical creatures of Gravity Falls are formidable in their own domains, but none of them approach Bill's level. The axolotl, however, operates on a scale that makes even Bill seem small. And the axolotl's poem about Bill is, I think, one of the most important pieces of text in the entire franchise. Each line reveals something essential about Bill's character that the show itself only hints at. Saw his own dimension burn confirms the destruction of Euclidia. Misses home and can't return tells us that Bill's bravado is a mask for homesickness, a longing for a place that no longer exists. Says he's happy, he's a liar, strips away Bill's performed cheerfulness and reveals the grief underneath. And if he wants to shirk the blame, he'll have to invoke my name, establishes that the axolotl represents something Bill desperately needs: accountability. Bill has been running from accountability for 1 trillion years. He destroyed his dimension and blamed it on the dimension's limitations. He manipulated Ford and blamed it on Ford's willingness to be manipulated. He caused Weirdmageddon and blamed it on the humans who failed to stop him. Bill never takes responsibility. He always finds a way to frame his actions as someone else's fault. And the axolotl says, if you want to move past what you've done, you have to face it. You have to invoke my name. You have to submit to a process you can't control. And that process is therapy. There's something both profound and darkly comic about the idea that the most powerful demon in the Gravity Falls universe is ultimately subjected to mandatory counseling. Bill, who has manipulated and controlled every being he's ever encountered, is now in a situation where he's the one being managed. He's in the Theraprism, wearing an orange jumpsuit, attending group sessions with other interdimensional tyrants, being asked about his feelings by therapists he can't con. The Book of Bill is, in its framing, Bill's therapy journal. It's the thing he was asked to write as part of his rehabilitation. And it's a failure. It's a document of a being who cannot or will not engage honestly with his own actions. Bill uses the journal to manipulate, to perform, to project an image of himself that deflects rather than illuminates. Even in therapy, even when the explicit goal is self-reflection, Bill can't stop being Bill. And that's either tragedy or comedy, depending on how you look at it. A being so committed to performance that he can't stop performing even when the audience is a therapist, and the only stakes are his own healing. A liar so deep in his own lies that truth has become structurally inaccessible to him. But there are moments, even in the Book of Bill, where the mask slips. Moments where the text glitches and fragments of genuine emotion break through. Guilt about Euclidia, confusion about his own feelings toward Ford, a flash of something that might be loneliness, quickly buried under another joke. These moments are rare, and they're easy to miss. But they're there. And they suggest that somewhere underneath the performance, underneath the lies and the manipulation and the trillion years of denial, there might still be something that could, theoretically, be healed. Whether it ever will be is another question entirely, and one that Gravity Falls, characteristically, refuses to answer. Now, before we get to the final reflections, I want to spend some more time in the details, because there are entire episodes and story threads we haven't fully explored yet, and some of them contain darkness that only becomes visible when you know where to look. Let's go back to Dreamscapers, the 19th episode of Season 1. This is the episode where Bill Cipher makes his first appearance, and it's worth examining in detail because so much of what the show will become is already present here. The episode begins with Gideon gleeful, desperate to defeat the Pines family and take over the Mystery Shack. He's tried everything: physical intimidation, legal challenges, giant robots. Nothing has worked. And so, in his desperation, he turns to something he found in Journal 2, a ritual to summon a dream demon. The summoning scene itself is loaded with ominous imagery. Gideon lights candles. He recites an incantation. He enters a trance. And then the world goes gray, and a voice begins to laugh. Bill Cipher materializes out of nowhere, a floating triangle with a single eye, a bow tie, and a top hat. He greets Gideon with terrifying familiarity, as if he's been waiting for this exact moment, as if he's known this conversation was coming for a very, very long time. And here's what most people miss about this scene. Bill doesn't just accept Gideon's deal. He's delighted by it. Not because the deal itself is valuable to him, but because it gives him access to Stan's mind. And Stan's mind is where the combination to the safe is stored. And that safe contains the deed to the Mystery Shack. And the Mystery Shack sits on top of the portal. Bill is playing a game that's several moves ahead of everyone else. Gideon thinks he's hiring Bill to steal a combination. But Bill is using Gideon to get closer to the portal. The deal is a means to an end that Gideon can't even comprehend. And that's something the show establishes right from Bill's first scene. Everyone who deals with Bill thinks they're the one in control, and they're always wrong. But the most revealing moment in Dreamscapers comes when Dipper, Mabel, and Seuss enter Stan's mind to stop Bill. Inside Stan's mindscape, they find a landscape made of Stan's memories and personality. There are doors that lead to different rooms of Stan's psyche, and one of those doors is marked with a "Do Not Enter" sign. Behind that door is a memory that Stan has kept hidden, even from himself. A memory of his childhood, of being bullied, of being told he was worthless. Dipper finds this memory, and for a moment, sees his great-uncle not as a gruff, confident con man, but as a scared kid who never really stopped being scared. The image of young Stan, sitting alone, rejected, afraid, is one of the most quietly devastating images in Season 1. And Bill, characteristically, tries to use this vulnerability as a weapon. He probes Stan's insecurities. He taunts him with his deepest fears. He treats Stan's inner landscape like a toy, rearranging memories and emotions with casual contempt. And in this scene, years before we learn about the portal or the identity theft or the 30-year lie, the show is already telling us who Bill is. He's not just powerful. He's cruel in a way that's specifically calibrated to exploit individual pain. He's a bespoke torturer. And Stan's mind is just the first in a long line of minds that Bill will violate throughout the series. This episode also contains the first warning about Bill that appears in the show. In Journal 3, Ford wrote the words, "Do not summon at all costs." Not be careful when summoning. Not summon only in emergencies. Do not summon at all costs. The most emphatic possible warning, an absolute prohibition. And the fact that this warning exists, that Ford felt the need to write it, tells us that Ford's experience with Bill was so terrible that he wanted to make sure nobody ever repeated his mistake. But of course, Gideon didn't read the warning. Or he read it and didn't care. And that's another pattern the show establishes early. The warnings are always there, and they're always ignored. Now let me talk about something we've touched on, but haven't really explored in depth, and that's the visual language of the show. Because Gravity Falls is, among other things, a masterclass in using animation to convey information that the dialogue never addresses. Consider the way the show depicts Bill's influence. Whenever Bill is nearby, or whenever his power is at work, the color palette shifts. Warm tones drain away. Everything becomes slightly blue, or gray, or sickly yellow. The angles of the animation change too, becoming more acute, more unsettling. Straight lines give way to triangular shapes. The geometry of the world starts to reflect Bill's own triangular form, as if his presence distorts not just reality, but the visual language used to depict it. This is subtle on a first viewing. Most viewers register it as, the scene feels creepy, without being able to articulate why. But on a rewatch, once you know to look for it, Bill's visual influence is everywhere. It's in the triangular window patterns of the Mystery Shack. It's in the pyramid shape of the town's water tower. It's in the way certain shadows fall in certain scenes, casting angular shapes that shouldn't be there. The show is telling you that Bill has been influencing Gravity Falls for far longer than any character realizes, and it's telling you through the visual medium itself rather than through exposition. There's another visual detail that deserves attention, and it involves the opening credits. We've talked about the cryptogram and the reversed whisper, but there's a moment in the credits that changes in the final few episodes of the series. A blink and you miss it frame where Bill's image flashes on screen, replacing one of the normal images. And the reversed whisper changes too. During the Weirdmageddon episodes, the reversed messages become increasingly panicked and desperate. The playful mystery-solving tone of earlier seasons gives way to something that sounds like a warning, a plea. This mirrors the show's own trajectory. What starts as a fun puzzle becomes a genuine crisis. The coded messages that were once games for the audience become SOS signals from a show that knows it's heading towards something terrible. And that shift, from playful to urgent, is captured not in the episodes themselves, but in the paratextual elements that surround them. The opening credits, the end cards, the cryptograms. Even the metastructure of the show acknowledges the gathering darkness. Let me also spend some time on a character we've mentioned in passing, but who deserves more attention. Blindin, the time traveler. Blindin appears in several episodes, starting with The Time Traveler's Pig in Season 1. He's a time enforcement agent from the year 20,701-2, sent to the past to fix temporal anomalies. He's nervous. He's awkward. He wears a ridiculous outfit. And he's played almost entirely for comedy. But Blindin's story takes a sharp turn in Season 2. In Blindin's game, we learn that Blindin was imprisoned and punished by the Time Police for the temporal anomalies that Dipper caused by using the time travel device. Blindon suffered the consequences of someone else's actions. He was punished for a mess he didn't make, and his response is to challenge Dipper and Mabel to a gladiatorial game in the future, where the losers will be erased from existence. That's dark enough on its own. But the really disturbing part comes later, during Weirdmageddon, when it's revealed that Bill has been possessing Blindon. Bill used Blindon's body, just as he used Dipper's in sock opera and Ford's during the Portal Project, as a vehicle to achieve his goals. Specifically, Bill used Blindon to get close to Mabel and trick her into handing over the interdimensional rift. Blindon is, essentially, a victim 3 times over. He's punished for Dipper's time crimes. He's possessed by Bill without his knowledge or consent, and he's used as a tool to trigger the apocalypse. And through all of this, the show treats him as a comic character. His suffering is the setup for jokes. His victimization is played for laughs. And on a first viewing, that's fine. He's funny. The comedy works. But on a rewatch, Blindon's story becomes a case study in how the show hides real pain behind humorous presentation. Blindon is a person who has been consistently used and discarded by more powerful beings. He has no agency. He has no power. He's a pawn in games he doesn't understand, and every time he appears, something bad happens to him. The show uses his comic incompetent tense as a mask for what is, underneath, a deeply sad story about a person who has never once been in control of his own life. And this connects to something broader about Gravity Falls that I think is worth noting. The show is full of secondary characters whose lives are defined by suffering that the narrative treats as normal. Toby Determined, the town journalist, is depicted as pathetic and lonely, and the show invites us to laugh at his loneliness. Robbie Valentino, the teenage goth, is shown to be deeply insecure and emotionally immature, and his pain is treated as comedy. Even Wendy Corduroy, one of the show's most likable characters, comes from a family of aggressive lumberjacks and seems to be performing a cool detachment that masks genuine anxiety. Gravity Falls is populated by wounded people, and the show's genius lies in making that population feel like a community rather than a catalog of trauma. These aren't issue of the week characters designed to teach a specific lesson. They're people, complex, contradictory, funny, and sad people who happen to live in a town where the supernatural provides a constant metaphor for the pain they're already carrying. And if you're enjoying this kind of layered analysis, subscribing really is the most helpful thing you can do. I know I sound like a broken record, but the truth is, long-form content like this doesn't get made without an audience that shows up for it, and you're that audience. So thank you. Now, let me talk about something that I find endlessly fascinating about Gravity Falls, and that's the community it created. Because one of the most remarkable things about this show isn't what it contains, but what it inspired. When Gravity Falls first aired, the coded messages and hidden details created a puzzle-solving community unlike anything television had seen before. Fans formed decoder networks. They built cipher-solving tools. They frame-by-frame analyzed every episode, cataloging every background detail, every numerical sequence, every suspicious shadow. And they did this not as a novelty, but as a sustained, years-long collective effort. The result was a community that functioned like an intelligence agency dedicated to a cartoon. Fans cracked codes within hours of episodes airing. They identified foreshadowing that Hirsch himself was surprised they caught. They predicted plot twists based on the tiniest details. And they were right so often that Hirsch reportedly had to increase the complexity of his codes just to stay ahead of them. This community matters because it demonstrates something important about the show's design. Gravity Falls wasn't just written to be watched. It was written to be investigated. Every episode was designed with the assumption that thousands of people would analyze it frame by frame, and the show rewarded that analysis consistently. The codes had real messages. The Easter eggs pointed to real plot developments. The foreshadowing paid off. The show respected its audience's intelligence and was rewarded with one of the most dedicated fan communities in the history of animation. But there's a darker dimension to this too, because the puzzle-solving community around Gravity Falls was, in a sense, doing exactly what Dipper does in the show. Obsessing over secrets, spending enormous amounts of time and energy deciphering hidden messages, and pursuing answers with a single-mindedness that sometimes crossed the line from dedication into compulsion. And Hirsch was aware of this parallel. In interviews, he's spoken about the tension between wanting to reward his fans' dedication and worrying that the puzzle-solving element was becoming unhealthy for some members of the community. The show itself addresses this tension through Dipper's character arc. Dipper's obsession with mysteries is treated as both his greatest strength and his most dangerous flaw. It drives the plot forward, but it also isolates him, endangers his relationships, and makes him vulnerable to manipulation by Bill. Is the show warning its own fans? Maybe. Or maybe it's just acknowledging a truth that applies to any pursuit of hidden knowledge. The deeper you go, the harder it becomes to stop. The more secrets you uncover, the more you believe there are still secrets to find. And at some point, the search for answers becomes its own kind of addiction, not unlike McGucket's compulsive use of the memory gun, just oriented in the opposite direction. McGucket was addicted to forgetting. The Cipher community was addicted to knowing. And both addictions, the show suggests, can consume you if you're not careful. This self-awareness, this willingness to interrogate its own cultural impact, is yet another thing that sets Gravity Falls apart. Most shows are content to be consumed. Gravity Falls was designed to be consumed, analyzed, and then analyzed again. And it built into its own structure a warning about the dangers of that exact process. It's a show that gives you puzzles and then tells you that puzzles can be traps. A show that rewards obsession and then shows you what obsession costs. Now, I want to go back to the Book of Bill one more time, because there are elements of it we haven't discussed that I think are crucial to understanding the full scope of Gravity Falls' darkness. One of the most discussed aspects of the Book of Bill is its visual content. The book contains imagery that goes far beyond anything the show depicted. We're talking about realistic illustrations of dismembered human body parts, pages that appear to be stained with blood, grotesque creatures consuming human beings, bodies torn apart, split open, their internal anatomy rendered in clinical detail. This imagery serves a specific narrative purpose. The Book of Bill is written from Bill's perspective, and it reflects Bill's worldview. To Bill, human bodies are objects. Interesting objects, certainly. Bill is fascinated by the mechanics of physical form, by the way skin stretches and bones break and blood flows. But his fascination is entirely divorced from empathy. He sees the human body the way a child sees a toy, something to be taken apart, examined, and discarded when the novelty wears off. The book's visual content forces the reader to see through Bill's eyes, to experience human bodies as Bill experiences them, as things, not as people, not as sentient beings with interior lives and feelings and dreams, as things, objects of curiosity, sources of entertainment. And the discomfort that the imagery provokes in the reader is exactly the point. It's the show asking, this is how Bill sees you. Does that scare you? It should. There are also pages in the Book of Bill that deal with Bill's view of human civilization. He catalogs human history with a mixture of amusement and contempt, noting the ways in which humans have failed, destroyed, and manipulated each other throughout the centuries. And his commentary is unsettling because it's not wrong. The wars he references are real. The atrocities he notes actually happened. Bill's cynicism about humanity is built on a foundation of historical fact, and the book challenges the reader to argue with him. This is another example of the Gravity Falls approach to moral complexity. Bill is wrong about many things. He's wrong that human life has no value. He's wrong that manipulation is the natural order of relationships. He's wrong that power is the only meaningful currency. But he's not wrong about everything. Humans really do destroy each other. Civilizations really do rise and fall. And the specific examples Bill cites, the wars and famines and betrayals he catalogs, are real events that actually occurred. The book doesn't let you dismiss Bill as simply delusional. His worldview is monstrous, but it's built on observations that are partially valid. And the challenge the book poses is not prove Bill wrong, but find the thing Bill is missing. The thing he can't see. The thing that makes human life valuable, despite all the evidence he marshals against it. And what is that thing? The show has been telling us all along. It's connection. It's the relationships between Stan and Ford, between Dipper and Mabel, between Seuss and the Pines family, between Pacifica and the choice to be better than her name. Bill can't see the value of human connection because he destroyed his own connections 1 trillion years ago and has been running from that loss ever since. His nihilism isn't a philosophical position, it's a defense mechanism. If nothing matters, then what he did to Euclidia doesn't matter either. If human connections are worthless, then the connections he lost are nothing to grieve. Bill's entire worldview is constructed to protect him from the weight of his own history. And the tragedy of his character is that the very thing he dismisses as worthless, genuine connection with other beings, is the only thing that could ever heal him. He's standing in front of the cure and insisting that the disease is preferable. And he's been doing it for 1 trillion years. Let me also talk about something specific from the Book of Bill that hasn't received enough attention. The book contains a sequence where Bill describes the moments after the destruction of Euclidia. The text becomes fragmented. Words disappear into static. The confident, mocking voice of Bill Cipher breaks down into something barely coherent. And in those fragments, you can piece together glimpses of genuine horror. Bill watching his dimension collapse. Bill reaching for people who aren't there anymore. Bill standing in the void where his home used to be, surrounded by nothing. These fragments are designed to be difficult to read, both literally and emotionally. The text is partially obscured, requiring effort to decode. And the effort of decoding mirrors the emotional effort of confronting what Bill has been hiding for 1 trillion years. The secrets don't reveal themselves easily. You have to work for them. And when you find them, they hurt. This is extraordinarily sophisticated narrative design for what is, ostensibly, a companion book to a children's cartoon. Hirsch is using the physical medium of the book, its layout, its visual design, its interactive elements, to replicate the emotional experience of uncovering repressed trauma. The reader performs the same act of excavation that a therapist might guide a patient through, digging through layers of defense and deflection to reach the raw wound underneath. And what they find is a being in pain, not the spectacular, dramatic pain of a villain's monologue. The quiet, suffocating pain of someone who has lived with a terrible secret for longer than human comprehension can accommodate. Bill destroyed his world. Bill killed his family. Bill has been carrying the souls of his parents inside him for nearly 1 trillion years, and he has never once, in all that time, allowed himself to truly face what he did, until the theraprism, until the axolotl forced him into a room with no exit and said, "Write it down." And even then, even when forced to confront his history, Bill couldn't do it. The Book of Bill is a failed confession, a journal that begins as manipulation and ends as avoidance. Bill starts the book trying to trick the reader into freeing him and ends it unable to complete a sentence about Euclidia. That failure is, in its own way, the most honest thing Bill has ever produced. Not the words he writes, but the words he can't. The sentences that trail off into static. The pages that blur. The moments where the mask slips and then is hastily replaced. These involuntary revelations tell us more about Bill than anything he says deliberately. And they tell us something that the show itself only hinted at. Bill Cipher, the all-seeing eye, the dream demon, the destroyer of worlds, is fundamentally incapable of facing himself. That's the final irony. The being who prides himself on seeing everything, who calls himself all-knowing, who claims to perceive reality more clearly than any other entity in the multiverse, cannot see the truth about himself. He's the most perceptive being in existence, and the one thing he can't perceive is his own guilt. His all-seeing eye is, in this one crucial respect, completely blind. And that blindness, that refusal to look inward, is what connects Bill to every other character in Gravity Falls. Stan refuses to look at who he really is, hiding behind Ford's name. Ford refuses to look at how he was manipulated, hiding behind his intellect. McGucket refuses to look at his memories, hiding behind erasure. Pacifica refuses to look at her family's crimes, hiding behind privilege. And Bill refuses to look at what he destroyed, hiding behind chaos. Gravity Falls is a show about the things we refuse to see. And on every rewatch, it shows you a little more of what you've been refusing to see yourself. And speaking of things we refuse to see, let me take us to an episode that I think is one of the most underrated in the entire series when it comes to hidden darkness. I'm talking about The Last Mabel Corn, the 15th episode of Season 2. On the surface, this episode has two plot lines. In the first, Ford is preparing the mystery shack for Bill's inevitable assault. He needs a unicorn hair to complete a protective barrier, and he sends Mabel and her friends to retrieve one from the last unicorn in the Gravity Falls forest, a creature named Celestabel Bethabel. In the second, Ford works on reinforcing the shack's defenses, while Dipper discovers a machine that records thoughts, which leads him to suspect that Ford may still be working with Bill. The Mabel plotline is mostly comedic. Celestabel Bethabel turns out to be a fraud, a narcissistic unicorn who gatekeeps access to her hair by claiming that only the pure of heart can touch it, then declaring that nobody who comes to her is pure enough. It's a fun subversion of fairy tale tropes, and it ends with Mabel and her friends literally fighting the unicorn and stealing her hair by force. Comedy gold. But the Ford and Dipper plotline is where things get genuinely unsettling. Dipper uses Ford's thought recording machine and discovers what appears to be Ford shaking hands with Bill, apparently still in league with the demon. Dipper confronts Ford, and Ford has to explain the truth. The image is old. It's from years ago, from before Ford understood what Bill really was. And the handshake, that innocent-looking gesture, was actually the moment Bill gained the ability to enter Ford's mind. A handshake. That's all it took. A simple, everyday human gesture of trust and agreement. And in the context of Gravity Falls, that handshake was an invasion. It was the moment Ford's cognitive autonomy was compromised. The moment a door opened in his mind that could never be fully closed. This detail rewrites every handshake in human experience. It takes something we do dozens of times a day, something we teach children as a sign of politeness and respect, and reveals it as the mechanism of Ford's violation. Bill didn't need a complex ritual or a dark incantation. He needed Ford to do something he'd done thousands of times before without thinking. Something ordinary. Something safe. That's what makes Bill's manipulation so effective and so terrifying. He doesn't operate in the dramatic register of horror movies. He doesn't need thunder and lightning and ominous chanting. He works through the mundane, through trust, through the everyday acts of human connection that we perform without thinking, because thinking about them would make life unbearable. And the scene where Ford reveals the metal plate in his skull, the one he had surgically implanted to prevent Bill from re-entering his mind, is one of the show's most chilling moments. Here is a man who was so violated by a handshake that he had surgery on his own brain to prevent it from happening again. The plate is a scar. It's evidence. It's Ford's permanent reminder that the most ordinary gesture of his life was also the most catastrophic. On a first viewing, the metal plate is a cool plot detail, a defense mechanism, a sign that Ford is smart and resourceful. On a rewatch, it's a wound, a measure of how deeply Bill hurt him. And the fact that Ford carries it inside his skull, invisible to everyone around him, is its own kind of metaphor. The damage that abusers do is often invisible. It lives inside the victim, hidden from view, shaping every decision they make without anyone else ever knowing it's there. Now, I want to spend a few minutes on something we haven't given proper attention to, and that's the role of Time Baby and the time enforcement apparatus in Gravity Falls. Because the show's treatment of time, fate, and cosmic authority is another area where the darkness runs deeper than you'd expect. Time Baby is presented as the ruler of the future, an enormous, all-powerful infant who controls the time police and enforces the laws of temporal reality. He's absurd. He's funny. A giant baby in a diaper who commands armies and passes judgment on temporal criminals. On a first viewing, he's one of the show's best comedic inventions. But think about what Time Baby actually represents. He's an absolute authority who controls the fundamental structure of reality. He decides what events are allowed to occur and which ones must be prevented. He commands a police force that travels through time to enforce his will. And there is no oversight, no appeal, no democratic process. Time Baby is a dictator, a cosmic tyrant who happens to be shaped like an infant. And when Bill destroys Time Baby during Weirdmageddon, vaporizing him with a single blast, the show plays it as a moment of villainy, which it is. But it's also the destruction of the only entity in the universe that was maintaining temporal order. With Time Baby gone, the laws of time are unenforceable. Paradoxes can occur unchecked. The timeline is unprotected. The show's end credit cryptogram reveals that Time Baby will eventually reconstitute, but it will take 1,000 years. That means for a millennium, reality has no temporal guardian. No one is watching the timeline. No one is preventing paradoxes. No one is enforcing the laws that keep cause and effect functioning properly. And this connects to a larger point that the show makes about authority and protection. Every protective structure in Gravity Falls is either corrupt, incompetent, or destroyed. The police can't protect the town. The Society of the Blind Eye protected people from knowledge rather than from harm. Time Baby protected the timeline, but was destroyed in moments. Even Ford's protective barriers around the Mystery Shack only worked temporarily. The show presents a world where no institution can be relied upon to provide lasting safety, where every system of protection is either compromised or fragile, and the only reliable source of safety is the bonds between individuals. Family, friendship, the willingness to sacrifice for people you love. These personal connections are the only things that work when everything else fails. That's a deeply anarchic message for a Disney show. Not political anarchy, but philosophical anarchy. The idea that structures and institutions and systems of authority are, ultimately, less dependable than the simple act of one person choosing to care about another. When the government fails and the cosmic authorities are destroyed, and the secret societies have compromised everyone's memories, what saves the world is a brother's love for his brother. A man willing to let his mind be erased so that his family can survive. The show doesn't romanticize this. It shows the cost. Stan's sacrifice isn't painless or clean or easy. It requires him to lose everything. But it works. The personal act succeeds where the institutional one couldn't. And Gravity Falls argues, quietly but firmly, that this is always how it works. That the world is saved not by systems, but by people. Not by authority, but by love. And if that's not something worth thinking about, I don't know what is. If that message resonates, and you haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate it. We've got just a little more ground to cover, and then I'll let you rest. There's also something worth noting about how the show handles the aftermath of Weirdmageddon, because the apocalypse in Gravity Falls doesn't end cleanly. It ends messily, ambiguously, with consequences that linger. After Bill's defeat and Stan's memory restoration, the town tries to return to normal. But normal, in Gravity Falls, has always been a lie. Normal was a construct maintained by the Society of the Blind Eye's memory gun. Normal was a fabrication built on decades of systematic amnesia. And now, after Weirdmageddon, the entire town has witnessed the supernatural firsthand. They can't unsee what they've seen. They can't unfeel what they've felt. The memory gun is gone, destroyed in the show's events, and for the first time in decades, the people of Gravity Falls have to live with the full knowledge of what their town really is. The show doesn't spend much time on this aftermath. There's too much else to resolve. But the implication is staggering. An entire community suddenly forced to integrate experiences that they have no framework for understanding. People who went about their daily lives for years, blissfully unaware of the monsters in their forest and the demon in their sky, now have to live with the knowledge that all of it was real. That the world is stranger and more dangerous than they ever imagined, and that the comfortable amnesia they'd been living in was itself a form of violation. This is, in a very real sense, what happens after any period of enforced ignorance. When the truth finally emerges, when the structures that maintained the fiction collapse, the people who were protected by the lie are often worse off than if they'd known all along. Because they have to process not just the truth itself, but the betrayal of having been kept from it. They have to grieve not just for what they've lost, but for the time they spent not knowing they'd lost it. The citizens of Gravity Falls will carry this with them for the rest of their lives. The summer of Weirdmageddon won't just be a bad memory. It will be the moment they discovered that everything they thought they knew about their world was wrong. And that discovery, that forced awakening, is itself a kind of trauma. Even if the intention behind the Society of the Blind Eye was protective, even if McGucket genuinely believed he was helping, the result is a town full of people who have been fundamentally destabilized by the collision of their assumed reality with the actual one. And isn't that, in a way, what rewatching Gravity Falls does to us? Not on a cosmic scale, obviously, but on a personal one. Each rewatch forces us to confront the gap between what we thought we were watching and what was actually there. Each layer of darkness we discover is a small-scale Weirdmageddon of the mind. A moment where our comfortable understanding of the show is disrupted by a deeper, more disturbing truth. The show does to its audience what reality does to the citizens of Gravity Falls. It strips away the comfortable fiction and reveals what's underneath. And what's underneath is always more complex, more painful, and more real than the fiction that covered it. Now let me talk about something that connects several of the threads we've been exploring, and that's the concept of trust in Gravity Falls. Because this show has a remarkably sophisticated and remarkably dark understanding of what trust is, how it works, and how it fails. Every major relationship in the show is defined by trust or its absence. Dipper trusts the journal, and that trust leads him into danger. Mabel trusts Stan, and that trust is founded on a lie. Ford trusted Bill, and that trust destroyed his life. McGucket trusted Ford, and that trust cost him his mind. Pacifica trusts her family, and that trust keeps her imprisoned. And the show argues, consistently, that trust itself isn't the problem. The problem is misplaced trust. Trust in the wrong person. Trust in someone who has their own agenda. Trust that's given freely to someone who will use it as a weapon. Bill Cipher is the ultimate expression of this theme. He doesn't force anyone to do anything. He asks. He persuades. He makes offers. He extends his hand and waits for you to shake it. And when you do, when you give him your trust, he uses it to destroy you. Not because he hates you, necessarily, but because your trust is useful to him. Your trust is a resource, a tool, a means to an end. The show's darkest insight about trust is this. The act of trusting someone gives them power over you. And in a world where some beings understand this dynamic better than others, where some people are always looking for others' trust to exploit, The simple, necessary, fundamentally human act of placing your faith in another person becomes a form of vulnerability. This is true in the real world too, of course. Every time you trust someone, you're making yourself vulnerable to betrayal. Every relationship, every friendship, every partnership is built on the assumption that the other person won't use your trust against you. And most of the time, that assumption holds. Most people don't betray trust deliberately, but some do. And Gravity Falls, through Bill, through the Northwests, through the Society of the Blind Eye, shows us what happens when the people we trust are not who they claim to be. When the muse is actually a manipulator. When the protector is actually a suppressor. When the family that's supposed to nurture you is actually programming you. And the show's answer to this isn't cynicism. It doesn't tell you to stop trusting people. It tells you to trust carefully, to pay attention, to look for the signs. And most importantly, it tells you that when trust is broken, the failure isn't yours. The failure belongs to the person who exploited your good faith. Ford isn't weak because Bill deceived him. Stan isn't foolish because he trusted his father. McGucket isn't stupid because he believed Ford would protect him. They're human. And being human means needing to trust, even when trust is dangerous. That's a nuanced, compassionate, and genuinely wise message for a show aimed at children. And it's delivered not through lectures or after-school special moralizing, but through the lived experiences of characters who feel real, even though they're animated. And I think this is a good moment to talk about something that I've been circling around for a while now, which is the way Gravity Falls handles the concept of forgiveness. Because forgiveness is central to the show's resolution, and the way it's depicted is far more complex than most stories attempt. In the series finale, after everything that's happened, after the identity theft and the lies and the decades of resentment, Stan and Ford reconcile. They forgive each other. They set out on the adventure they dreamed of as children, sailing the Arctic on the Stano War II, finally fulfilling the promise they made to each other when they were kids. On a first viewing, this is a triumphant moment. The brothers reunited at last. The dream realized. The wounds healed. It's the kind of resolution that makes you want to cheer. But on a rewatch, the reconciliation raises questions that the show doesn't fully answer. And those questions are darker than the resolution itself. Can you really forgive 30 years? Not just the big things, the identity theft, the portal accident, the decades of silence, but the small things, the accumulated weight of 30 years of resentment. The nights Stan spent alone in the basement, burning himself on faulty wiring. The years Ford spent in other dimensions, fighting for survival. The birthdays they missed. The conversations they never had. The simple fact that they grew old without each other. Forgiveness in real life isn't a single moment. It's a process. A daily choice to not let the past define the present. And the show, in its finite runtime, can only give us the beginning of that process. We see Stan and Ford shake hands. We see them sail away together. But we don't see the hard conversations that must follow. The nights where old resentments surface. The moments where one brother says something that opens an old wound, and the other has to choose again to forgive. The show trusts its audience to understand that the reconciliation isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a different one. A story about two old men trying to build a relationship from the ruins of the one they destroyed. And that story, the one the show doesn't tell, might be the most challenging one of all. Because here's the thing about forgiveness that Gravity Falls understands implicitly. Forgiveness doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't restore the lost years. It doesn't heal the scars. What it does is create the possibility of moving forward despite the damage. It doesn't fix the past. It frees the future. And that's a hard truth. Harder, in some ways, than any of the supernatural horrors the show depicts. Because it means that even in the best case scenario, even when reconciliation is possible, the pain remains. The wasted years remain. The things that were said and done and suffered remain. Forgiveness isn't erasure. It's coexistence. It's choosing to live alongside the pain rather than being consumed by it. Stan and Ford sailing together isn't a happy ending in the traditional sense. It's a brave one. Two men who have every reason to hate each other, choosing not to. Two men who have been apart for most of their adult lives, choosing togetherness despite not knowing if it will work. Two men who have caused each other immeasurable pain, choosing to try anyway. That's not a fairy tale resolution. That's the real, difficult, imperfect kind of healing that actual human beings have to do when they've been hurt by the people they love most. And the fact that Gravity Falls depicts it, that it trusts its young audience to understand the difference between easy resolution and genuine reconciliation, is one of the bravest things about the show. And it connects to every other character's arc too. Mabel forgives Dipper for almost choosing Ford's apprenticeship over her. Dipper forgives Mabel for the events that led to Weirdmageddon. The town forgives Stan for his decades of deception. McGucket forgives himself, or begins to, for the damage he caused. Even Pacifica, in opening the mansion gates, is performing a kind of forgiveness, choosing to release her family from the debt of a broken promise, even though she didn't break it herself. Forgiveness isn't just a plot resolution in Gravity Falls. It's the show's moral center. The thing that separates its heroes from its villains. Because the one character who never forgives, who never lets go, who never moves forward, is Bill Cipher. Bill holds on to his grievances for 1 trillion years. He nurses his resentment against Euclidia, against Ford, against the entire physical universe. He can't forgive his world for not believing him. He can't forgive himself for destroying it. And his inability to forgive is what keeps him trapped in a cycle of destruction that never leads anywhere. Bill is what you become when you can't let go. When the wound becomes your identity. When the resentment becomes your fuel. He's the cautionary tale at the heart of Gravity Falls. A being of infinite power and zero wisdom, who could have had anything but chose to have nothing, because nothing is what you get when you refuse to forgive. And the show places this cautionary tale right next to the example of its opposite. Stan, who forgives. Stan, who lets go. Stan, who gives up his memories, his identity, everything he is, not out of weakness, but out of love. Stan, who shows that forgiveness isn't just about the other person. It's about yourself. It's about choosing to stop carrying the weight, to stop feeding the anger, to stop building your life around the thing that hurt you. That's the final lesson of Gravity Falls. Not encoded in a cipher or hidden in the background art. Just there, in the story itself, waiting for you to see it. Forgive. Not because the person who hurt you deserves it, but because you deserve to be free of the hurt. Because carrying it forever turns you into Bill, and letting it go turns you into Stan, sailing into the unknown with the person you thought you'd lost. Finally free. That's the thought I'd like you to carry with you as we move into the final reflection of this deep dive. Let me take us to one more specific area before we begin wrapping up. I want to talk about Alex Hirsch himself, because understanding the creator helps illuminate the creation. Hirsch was born on June 18th, 1985. He grew up in Piedmont, California, which is also where Dipper and Mabel are from. He has a twin sister, Ariel, who served as the primary inspiration for Mabel. The show's central dynamic, twins navigating a strange and sometimes frightening world together, is drawn directly from Hirsch's own childhood experience of being a twin and the unique bond that relationship creates. But the autobiographical elements go deeper than the surface details. Hirsch has spoken about his own experiences with family dysfunction, with feeling different, with the complicated process of growing up. And the show channels those experiences into something universal without ever feeling self-indulgent or confessional. What's most remarkable about Hirsch as a creator is his commitment to honesty. Not literal honesty, obviously. The show is full of monsters and magic and interdimensional portals, but emotional honesty. Hirsch refuses to simplify the emotional realities of his characters' experiences. Stan's pain is real. Ford's violation is real. McGucket's addiction is real. And Hirsch treats them with a seriousness that communicates respect for both the characters and the audience. Hirsch also voices several characters in the show, most notably both Grunkle Stan and Bill Cipher. The fact that the same person voices the show's most sympathetic character and its most terrifying villain creates an unsettling resonance. Stan's gruff warmth and Bill's manic cruelty come from the same voice, and there are moments where you can hear one character's cadence in the other's dialogue. It's as if the show is telling you that the line between hero and villain is thinner than you think, that the same voice can comfort you and destroy you, that the difference between Stan and Bill isn't fundamental, it's circumstantial. Hirsch also made the deliberate decision to end the show after 2 seasons, despite the fact that Disney would have happily continued it for years. And this decision, which might seem like a business miscalculation, is actually central to what makes Gravity Falls work. The show is designed as a complete story, a single summer with a beginning, middle, and end. And by ending it when he did, Hirsch ensured that the story retained its structural integrity. Nothing is padded. Nothing is filler. Every episode contributes to the larger narrative, and the darkness of the show is never diluted by the need to produce more content than the story can support. There are many showrunners who talk about their shows as finite stories. Very few actually follow through. Hirsch did, and the result is a show that functions as a single, cohesive work of art rather than an ongoing commercial product. Gravity Falls doesn't overstay its welcome. It arrives, it tells its story, and it leaves. And the absence it leaves behind is part of the story itself. Because the ending of Gravity Falls, the departure of Dipper and Mabel, the resolution of the summer, is also the ending of the audience's time in this world. When the twins get on the bus and leave Gravity Falls, we leave too. The mysteries are solved. The secrets are revealed. And there's nothing left to discover except what we bring to the show ourselves on the next rewatch. And that's a beautiful, melancholy, and ultimately generous artistic choice. Hirsch gave us a world we could live in for 2 seasons, and then he took it away. Not because he ran out of ideas, not because the show was canceled, because the story was over, because the summer had to end. And some things, Gravity Falls argues, are more beautiful for being finite. Now, and I appreciate you being here for this, because we're deep into the night, and I want to make sure I acknowledge the time you're spending with me. If you've subscribed, thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you haven't, there's still time, and it really does matter. Every subscriber is a person who says, yes, this kind of thoughtful, long-form exploration is worth supporting. And that message keeps us going. Let me bring us to one more dark revelation before we begin the final reflection. Because there's an aspect of the Book of Bill that we haven't discussed, and it might be the most disturbing thing in the entire Gravity Falls mythology. The Book of Bill reveals, through its interactive elements and hidden codes, additional details about what happened during the years between Ford's disappearance and the start of the show. These are the lost years. The decades when Ford was trapped in other dimensions, Stan was rebuilding the portal, and the town of Gravity Falls was slowly, invisibly, being shaped by forces its residents couldn't perceive. During those 30 years, the fabric of reality around Gravity Falls was weakening. Not dramatically, not in ways that caused obvious crises, but subtly, gradually. The boundary between dimensions, already thin, was getting thinner, and strange things were leaking through. The creatures that populate the show, The gnomes, and the multi-bear, and the shapeshifter, and all the rest didn't all originate in Gravity Falls. Some of them crossed over from other dimensions through the micro-tears in reality that the portal's partial activation caused. Stan didn't fully activate the portal for 30 years, but his attempts, his decades of trial and error, created tiny fissures in the dimensional barrier, not big enough for a person to pass through, but big enough for other things. This means that the supernatural menagerie of Gravity Falls is partially Stan's fault. Not intentionally, not knowingly, but his 30-year effort to save his brother was simultaneously making the town more dangerous for everyone who lived there. The gnomes that kidnap Mabel in the first episode, the ghost couple that haunts the convenience store, the various monsters and entities that threaten the twins throughout the series. Some of these exist because Stan's portal work created the conditions for them to arrive. And Stan doesn't know this. He doesn't find out during the show. It's one of those implications that sits in the background, never addressed directly, but coloring everything once you're aware of it. Stan sacrificed his identity and 30 years of his life to save Ford. And in the process, he inadvertently endangered every person in Gravity Falls, including the great-niece and great-nephew he would come to love. The show never condemns Stan for this. How could it? He didn't know. He couldn't have known. He was doing the best he could with information he didn't have, guided by love and guilt in equal measure. But the irony is inescapable. Stan's greatest act of devotion was simultaneously an act of inadvertent destruction. The same determination that makes him heroic is also what made the town less safe. And this, I think, is the final and perhaps the most important thing that Gravity Falls has to say about human nature. We are capable of causing harm through the very actions we undertake out of love. Our best intentions can have our worst consequences. And the only way to navigate this fundamental uncertainty is to keep trying anyway, knowing that we can never fully predict or control the effects of our choices. Stan kept trying. For 30 years, through loneliness and failure and self-doubt, he kept trying. And ultimately, he succeeded. He brought Ford back. He saved the world. He earned the love of his family. But the cost of his success was higher than he knew, and the ledger of consequences was more complex than anyone could have calculated. That's the human condition, rendered in cartoon form. We act, we hope, we do our best, and we never quite know whether the net effect of our lives has been positive or negative. We just keep going, and hope that the love outweighs the damage. Before we get to the final reflection, there's one more thread I want to pull, and it might be the thread that ties everything together. I want to talk about the concept of the deal, because deals are, in many ways, the fundamental unit of storytelling in Gravity Falls. And the way the show uses deals reveals something profound about its understanding of human nature. Every major turning point in Gravity Falls involves a deal. Ford makes a deal with Bill, knowledge in exchange for access to his mind. Stan makes a deal with himself, a stolen identity in exchange for a chance to save his brother. McGucket makes a deal with the memory gun, peace of mind in exchange for cognitive function. Gideon makes a deal with Bill, power in exchange for servitude. Mabel, unwittingly, makes a deal with Blindness as Bill, the rift in exchange for an endless summer. Even Pacifica's family operates on a deal structure. The lumberjacks build the mansion in exchange for a party that never happens. And in every single case, the deal costs more than it promises. The knowledge Ford gains comes with a parasite in his mind. The identity Stan steals comes with 3 decades of isolation. The peace McGucket buys comes with his sanity. The power Gideon receives comes with his soul. The endless summer Mabel is offered comes in the form of a cage. And the mansion the lumberjacks built comes at the cost of their lives. This pattern is so consistent that it becomes the show's central thesis. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Everything has a price. And the price is always hidden in the fine print that nobody reads. Now, this is a common theme in fiction. Deal with the devil stories are as old as storytelling itself. But Gravity Falls does something unusual with the trope. It doesn't just show that deals are dangerous. It explores why people make them anyway. People make deals in Gravity Falls because they're in pain. Ford makes his deal with Bill because he's lonely and desperate for connection. Stan makes his deal with himself because he's consumed by guilt. McGucket makes his deal with the memory gun because he's traumatized. Gideon makes his deal because he's a child trying to feel powerful in a world that makes him feel small. Mabel makes her deal because she's afraid of growing up. Every deal in the show originates in suffering, and every deal promises to alleviate that suffering. The problem isn't that the people who make deals are stupid or greedy or evil. The problem is that they're hurting, and the deal seems like the fastest way to make the hurt stop. And Bill understands this perfectly. That's what makes him such an effective deal maker. He doesn't appeal to greed or ambition. He appeals to pain. He finds the wound and offers a bandage. And the bandage, once applied, turns out to be worse than the wound. This is, I think, the most psychologically astute aspect of the show's design. It understands that manipulation doesn't target strength. It targets vulnerability. The strongest fortress in the world is useless if the attacker knows where the crack is. And Bill always knows where the crack is, because he looks for it. He studies people. He watches them. He identifies their specific individual pain, and he constructs his offer around it. This is how real predators operate, not through force or intimidation, but through the exploitation of need. The most dangerous people in the world are the ones who know exactly what you're missing and offer to provide it. And Gravity Falls, through Bill, teaches this lesson with a clarity that most educational materials about manipulation can't achieve. Because it doesn't just tell you what manipulation looks like. It shows you how it feels. It makes you understand, viscerally, why someone would shake Bill's hand even when the warning signs are everywhere. Because when you're in enough pain, any offer of relief feels worth the risk. And that leads me to something I've been thinking about throughout this entire deep dive. Something that I think is the key to understanding why Gravity Falls gets darker on every rewatch, and why that darkness matters. Gravity Falls is a show about the gap between what things look like and what things are. The Mystery Shack looks like a tourist trap. It's actually the entrance to an interdimensional laboratory. Stan looks like a lovable con man. He's actually a man who erased himself to save his brother. Ford looks like a heroic scientist. He's actually a victim of psychological abuse. McGucket looks like a crazy old man. He's actually a genius who lobotomized himself with his own invention. Pacifica looks like a spoiled rich girl. She's actually a child conditioned into obedience through behavioral programming. Bill looks like a fun cartoon villain. He's actually one of the most complex and disturbing depictions of an abuser in modern media. Everything in Gravity Falls is more than it appears. And the darkness of the show comes from the realization that what lies beneath the surface is almost always worse than what's visible above it. This is true in the real world too. The people around us are carrying things we can't see. The institutions we trust are built on foundations we don't examine. The stories we tell ourselves about our own lives are simplified versions of a reality that's far more complicated, far more painful, and far more beautiful than the summary we present to the world. Gravity Falls understands this, and it uses the conventions of children's animation, bright colors, funny voices, happy endings, to lull us into thinking we're watching something simple. And then, layer by layer, rewatch by rewatch, it reveals the complexity underneath. It doesn't force the truth on us. It lets us discover it at our own pace. And every time we come back, we're ready to see a little more. That's the genius of the show. It's not just dark. It's strategically dark. It arranges its darkness in layers, like geological strata, so that each viewing excavates a new stratum. The surface layer is fun. The next layer is intriguing. The layer after that is surprising. And eventually, deep enough down, you hit something that genuinely disturbs you. Something that makes you look at the show differently. Something that makes you look at the world differently. And that's not an accident. That's design. Hirsch designed Gravity Falls to be a show that grows with its audience. A show that a 10-year-old can enjoy and a 30-year-old can be disturbed by. A show that changes not because its content changes, but because the viewer does. And in a media landscape that's largely designed for instant consumption and immediate obsolescence, a show that rewards patience and growth and repeated engagement is genuinely radical. There's one more thing I want to explore before we bring this all home, and it's something that I think gives Gravity Falls its ultimate emotional power. I want to talk about endings, about how the show uses the concept of an ending, not just narratively, but philosophically. Gravity Falls is a show about a summer, not a school year, not a lifetime. A summer, 3 months. And from the very beginning, the audience knows that the summer will end. Dipper and Mabel will leave. The Mystery Shack will become quiet. The adventures will stop. This isn't a spoiler. It's the premise. The show is, structurally, a countdown. And that countdown gives everything in the show a weight that it wouldn't otherwise have. Every moment of joy is tinged with the knowledge that it's temporary. Every discovery is shadowed by the awareness that the discoverers will soon leave. Every relationship is conducted under the unspoken understanding that separation is coming. This is, of course, a metaphor for childhood itself. Childhood is a summer. It feels endless while you're in it, but it's already ending from the moment it begins. And the experiences you have during that summer, the friendships, the discoveries, the fears, and the triumphs, they shape the rest of your life, even though they're over before you're ready. Gravity Falls captures this feeling with extraordinary precision. The final episode, Weirdmageddon Part 3, Take Back the Falls, isn't just a battle against Bill Cipher. It's an ending. The last day of summer. The bus is coming. And Dipper and Mabel have to say goodbye to a place that changed them fundamentally. And the goodbyes are specific. They're not generic, sentimental farewells. They're individual, detailed partings that acknowledge the particular relationship each character has with the twins. Seuss, who found in Dipper and Mabel the family his father never gave him. Wendy, who represented everything cool and aspirational about being a teenager. Grunkle Stan, who loved them more than he could ever express, and who they saved from oblivion. And Gravity Falls itself, the town that was never quite what it seemed. The place where the vending machine leads to another dimension, and the crazy old man in the junkyard used to be a genius. The show treats the ending of summer with the same gravity it gives to the cosmic conflicts. And in doing so, it argues that the personal stakes, saying goodbye to friends, leaving a place you love, accepting that a chapter of your life is over, are just as important as the universal ones. Maybe more important, because cosmic conflicts can be resolved through heroism and sacrifice. But the passage of time can't be fought. The summer ends whether you want it to or not, and no amount of bravery can change that. This is, I think, the deepest darkness in Gravity Falls. Deeper than Bill's cruelty. Deeper than Stan's sacrifice. Deeper than McGucket's self-destruction. The deepest darkness is time itself. The unstoppable, indifferent mechanism that takes everything from you, not through malice, but through motion. The summer ends. The children grow up. The mysteries are solved. And you can't go back. On a first viewing, the ending of Gravity Falls is satisfying. On a rewatch, it's devastating. Because you know what's coming. You know the bus is coming. And every funny moment, every warm interaction, every scene of Dipper and Mabel laughing together in the forest is shadowed by the knowledge that it will end. And that shadow doesn't diminish the joy. It deepens it. It makes it more precious, more beautiful, more painful. This is the show's final trick. Its deepest, most devastating Easter egg. Not a coded message or a background symbol, but the simple, inescapable fact that all good things end, that the best summer of your life will eventually become a memory, and that the memory, precious as it is, can never quite capture the feeling of being there. Gravity Falls gets darker on every rewatch, not just because you notice new details, not just because you understand the characters more deeply, not just because the themes resonate differently as you age. It gets darker because every rewatch is another reminder that the show is over, that the summer is over, that you can't go back to the first time you watched it, when you didn't know the secrets, when the mystery was still alive, when the ending was still unknown. And that loss, that tiny, personal, utterly universal loss, the loss of a first experience, is something no amount of rewatching can restore. You can rediscover the show. You can find new layers. You can deepen your understanding. But you can't unknow what you know. You can't unfeel what you've felt. And you can't unsee what you've seen. And so, in the end, the darkness of Gravity Falls isn't about Bill Cipher, or the Northwests, or the memory gun, or the portal. It's about you, about the person watching, about the fact that you've changed since the first time you pressed play, and you can't change back. The show grows darker because you grow older, and the darkness you see isn't really in the show at all. It's in the gap between who you were when you first watched it and who you are now. That gap is called growing up. And Gravity Falls, more than any other show I've ever encountered, understands that growing up is both the most wonderful and the most terrible thing that can happen to a person. Now, let's talk about what all of this means. Not what Gravity Falls is about, in terms of plot or character, but what it means, what it adds to the world, why it matters that this show exists. Gravity Falls premiered on the Disney Channel on June 15, 2012. It ran for 40 episodes over 2 seasons, ending on February 15, 2016. Its creator, Alex Hirsch, voiced several characters including both Stan and Bill Cipher. It was produced for a target audience of children and young teenagers. And within those parameters, those 40 episodes, that time slot, that audience, Hirsch created something that transcends its context entirely. He created a show about generational trauma that airs between commercials for toys. A show about abuse that runs alongside shows about talking animals and magical princesses. A show about the cost of knowledge, the failure of institutions, the destruction of memory, and the human capacity for self-deception. And he made it funny. He made it watchable. He made it beloved by millions of children who had no idea on their first viewing what they were actually watching. And that's the real magic trick. Not the ciphers, not the Easter eggs, not the hidden messages in the opening credits. The real magic trick is that Gravity Falls taught a generation of children about the darkest aspects of human experience without ever making them feel like they were being taught. The lessons are in the story. The warnings are in the characters. And the wisdom is in the spaces between the jokes. Ford's story teaches you what manipulation looks like before you ever encounter it in the real world. Stan's story teaches you what sacrifice costs before you ever have to make one. McGucket's story teaches you what happens when you run from pain before you've developed the habit of running. Pacifica's story teaches you that you are not your family before you've had time to internalize the belief that you are. And Bill's story, perhaps most importantly of all, teaches you that the most dangerous people are often the most charming, the most insightful, the most willing to tell you that you're special. These are survival skills disguised as entertainment. And for the children who watched Gravity Falls at the age it was intended for, those survival skills are now part of their emotional vocabulary. When they encounter a Bill in their own lives, someone who flatters them and isolates them and makes them feel uniquely understood, they'll have a reference point. They'll know, somewhere in the back of their mind, that this is how the triangle demon operates. And that knowledge might protect them in ways that 100 after-school specials never could. That's the legacy of Gravity Falls. Not the fan theories, or the merchandise, or the viral moments. The legacy is a generation of children who grew up with a better understanding of darkness because a man named Alex Hirsch decided that children deserve honesty more than they deserve protection from the truth. And now, as we come to the end of this journey, I want to return to where we started, because the title of this video is about lore that gets darker every time you revisit it. And I've been trying, over the course of these few hours, to take you through those layers. From the light surface of Easter eggs and coded messages, down through the medium depths of Stan's identity and Ford's manipulation, deeper into McGucket's addiction and Pacifica's conditioning, and finally to the darkest places. Bill's destroyed dimension, the Book of Bill's explicit horrors, and the philosophical questions that sit at the very bottom of the show's mythology. But here's the thing I want to leave you with. The reason Gravity Falls gets darker on every rewatch isn't just because the show contains dark material. It's because you change between viewings. The show is the same 40 episodes it always was. The Easter eggs haven't moved. The cryptograms haven't changed. The dialogue is identical frame by frame to what it was when it first aired in 2012. What changes is you. When you're 12, you watch Gravity Falls, and you see a fun mystery show with cool monsters and a scary triangle man. You laugh at Stan's jokes, and you cheer when the heroes win, and you feel sad when the summer ends. That's what the show is designed to give you at 12. When you're 16, you come back and you see a show about growing up, about the end of childhood, about the terrifying and exhilarating process of discovering that the world is bigger and stranger and more dangerous than you thought. You see Dipper and Mabel's journey as a reflection of your own, and the show gives you a language for experiences you're just beginning to have. When you're 20, you come back and you see the family dynamics. Stan's relationship with his father, Ford's isolation, the Northwest's generational toxicity. You recognize these patterns now because you've started to see them in your own family, in your friends' families, in the slow, painful work of understanding where you came from and how it shaped you. When you're 25, you come back and you see the abuse. Bill and Ford's relationship isn't just a fantasy anymore. It's a pattern you've seen in the real world. The flattery, the isolation, the gaslighting, the possession. You know people who've been through this. Maybe you've been through it yourself. And the show's depiction of it, so precise and so unflinching, hits in a way it couldn't have when you were younger. And when you're 30, you come back and you see all of it at once. The Easter eggs and the abuse, the comedy and the trauma, the monsters and the metaphors. You see a show that was always trying to tell you the truth, in a language you weren't ready to hear. And you realize that Alex Hirsch trusted you. He trusted that you'd come back. He trusted that you'd grow. And he hid messages in the walls for you to find when you were ready. That's what Gravity Falls is. A show that grows up with you. A show that meets you wherever you are and shows you whatever you're ready to see. A show that contains the entire spectrum of human experience, from the lightest joke to the darkest truth, and wraps it all in a mystery that never quite ends. Because here's the final secret. The one that the ciphers and the Easter eggs and the hidden messages are all pointing toward. The mystery of Gravity Falls isn't about who wrote the journals, or what's behind the vending machine, or why the Triangle Man wants to destroy the world. The mystery of Gravity Falls is the mystery of being alive, of carrying secrets, of loving people who hurt you, of hurting people you love, of trying to understand a world that's too big and too strange and too beautiful to ever fully comprehend. And that mystery doesn't have a solution. Not in the show. Not in the Book of Bill. Not in the codes or the ciphers or the hidden pages. It's the kind of mystery that you can only engage with, not solve. The kind that deepens the more you look at it. The kind that changes you just by looking. So yeah, Gravity Falls gets darker every time you watch it. But it also gets more beautiful, more true, more necessary. And if you've made it this far, If you've spent these hours with me exploring the depths of a show about two kids and a weird summer in Oregon, then I think you already know why. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If you're still awake, I appreciate your attention more than you know. If you've fallen asleep, I hope the dreams are warm and weird and full of pine trees. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe. Not because I need the numbers, although they help, but because this community, this strange little gathering of people who care about stories and their meanings, this is something worth preserving. Just like the Mystery Shack. Just like the journals. Just like the memories that McGucket tried so hard to erase. Some things are worth remembering. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. And remember, reality is an illusion. The universe is a hologram. Buy gold. Just kidding. But not about the sleeping well part. I'll see you next time.